Hello, welcome everyone. We've got Seth and Chris here. Seth from Transcendent Philosophy and Chris from Porch Time,
Yeah,
right?
I guess so.
Yeah, today we decided to have a little dialectic about politics. You know, nothing too controversial, just some light conversation.
Yeah, it always goes that way, right? No, I doubt we'd be getting that rough with each other, but
Yeah, exactly. Well, kind of like the political divide was one of the things that motivated my channel. Because there was a certain infographic that kind of scared the crap out of me. It was when was it? It was probably it was it was around the Trump election. I saw this infographic. I was like, "Holy crap, we're gonna have a civil war! Like polarization is going nuts." And so I was like, "Well, it's to me, it seemed like this political divide. If you like dug down to the root of it, it was a philosophic divide." And so I started this investigation into, is there a way to like resolve these philosophic divides? What are the mechanisms? What are the epistemologies? What are the steps that need to be taken to kind of unify us onto the same page? You know what I mean?
yeah, I totally understand that. I don't think I've just watched a certain level of podcast this past week that it doesn't look like whatever you were fearing is getting any better. Like I think it might be getting generally worse. We still might be leading towards civil war, and there's a lot of different little metrics that people look at that point towards that. Of course, anything could happen, but I sort of worried about it too. But in the we started our podcast under the concept of in the ex-Mormon world, which is somewhere that we kind of ran around in. To us, it seemed to be very, very, very single-minded in one sorts of things. So we came in to be a pushback from the direction, but being peacemakers, I mean, I don't know that we were trying to do that at all, but just being a counterbalance is kind of more the way we saw it. But
Sure,
the
sure.
the all of us on that podcast are a little bit of, I don't know, I would say that we originally all kind of started from maybe more of the other side, and then looking into, we're still manning the positions of the other side, started leaning the other way. But I think we could swing any which way. But how to ameliorate the problem and get people to chill out. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of it of just saying like, hey, calm down here and look at what's going on, people. And that's the same way we used to talk to religious people as ex-religious people. And I don't know that that's ever been effective. And I don't know that effectiveness has ever been the case, more than just kind of being somebody who people could see solidarity in in a different position with. But
Yeah, I think all of that's 100% valid. I think this whole approach to like whatever, like unity or whatever, like my thoughts are, and we'll probably dig into this more, is like it's probably a very complex strategic alignment. Like just being nice all the time is not always the perfect strategy for unity. Like sometimes being a little bit confrontational to like open someone's mind to a different perspective, sometimes that might be the right strategy. You know what I mean? So
it happened to me a few times that somebody wasn't nice to me and it made me stop and think. But then the other ways also happen too, where somebody's perfectly nice and that's what helped, But
yeah, it's really complicated. I've had the same experience where both strategies have been effective with me at different times. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't mapped out when to use each strategy. That's still part of the project of figuring out when to do what to, get to the goal or whatever.
yeah, and I don't calculate it well enough too. But at the same time, part of our podcast is to have fun with it and just be kind of, I don't know, South Parkian a little bit about stuff and have our own fun. And at the same time, like I don't put us out there as somebody who's trying to solve the problem. It's kind of more just like, let's have fun with the world here, or complain about it or whine about it. But
Yeah.
One of the ways I justify that in my mind too, and maybe this is a dumb thing or a dumb way to be, but we don't advertise it out at all. Like people have to find us. You know what I mean? We're not trying to march into the world saying, hey, you
Mm.
know, we're like just a thing that's there for people who, if they find us, they find something,
Mm.
and that's that. You know, so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's pretty legitimate.
Mm.
So, so thinking about one of for the project that I'm working on, the dialectic is a very fundamental principle. It's kind of like this ideological compromise that comes through opposites coming together. Do you have any interesting thoughts or takes on a dialectical approach to politics?
Well, there's multiple different types of dialectics, you know, as you know now, and I think there's different ways to go about it. And I think there's some types of dialectics I do not agree with, and there's some types that I think are the only way to do the world, you know. And I really appreciate a Platonic dialectic, which is the concept of, you know, John Vervaeke talks about that a whole lot, and it's the concept of we're not forcing each other to ultimately have to meld into or accept or become a new thing, like in the Hegelian way. It's more, we're going to have to learn how to act with each other and get along and figure out what the other person is and how we both now act in the world, knowing that the other person has that sort of thing. Whereas, I mean, I think a Hegelian dialectic has a bit more intention behind it from one direction. Like there's an intention that it has a certain outcome in a certain way, and it's going to move this direction if we keep re-upping the conflict here. And so I think that intentionality behind it kind of starts it from a I don't know, a stunted place, but and
Mhm.
that's my opinion on that. So if it really is like, hey, we really are going to figure out some middle ground on how to act with each other or how to make it, but if it's starting from a place of I'm going to move you with my dialectic, I think
Mm.
that could be bad faith
Do you
um,
Would you say that, would you describe that type of dialectic as a manipulative dialectic? Is that what you find distasteful?
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
It's got a direction. It's got an endpoint in mind, and
Yeah.
the dialectic where the endpoint is we're just going to figure this out to each other better, no matter what's right. I think that's a completely good faith, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, in watching your channel a little bit, to me, it seems like one of the types of dialectics you guys seem to engage with is a Socratic dialectic. And like when I think of a Socratic dialectic, like Socrates in his dialogues, it seems like there's a pattern of where he asks people to like, what's your stance? And then he like pokes holes in their stances, like, oh, here's a contradiction. You didn't think about that, right?
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you
and
think?
that's great. I think like a lot of different things we might talk about today, because I saw your list of things to talk about, is um, certain things maybe have to have like an endpoint, and the Socratic dialectic is like it's a little bit like deconstruction. Like it can just go forever and ever and ever, you know, and
Yeah.
you could get down to the point where you're questioning the entire meaning of existence. In fact, anytime you do it, you should get all the way down to that point. And
Right, right.
to my point, to my perception, at some point, the pragmatics of that kind of get lost a little bit, and just um, so Socratic's awesome and great. I don't think it's malintentioned, but to a point, like it's got to have like a point of like, okay, we're going too deep
Yeah.
with this, you know.
That's probably why all the Socratic dialectics, they always end at an arbitrary point. It's like they didn't even like finish the problem. They're like, we're just gonna stop here because we don't want to go past this.
Yeah. And if you look at it, if you take Nietzsche's complaints about them, also with some praise of Socrates, you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of like an ego thing. Like some people jokingly say the Socratic dialogues were ultimately like those people on TikTok who are having conversations with themselves and making the point with themselves. Like it really was kind of all told from the perception of the protagonist there, who's getting down to the
Mm.
bottom of the stuff, and the other person's whoa, and then by the end of it, it's like you're so great, Socrates. But
Right.
it's an awesome tool. It's an awesome tool to think about and use in the world. It's also like at some point you got to put down the hammer. Like the hammer's, you know, you know what I'm saying with that. So,
No. Okay. No, I actually don't. Can you describe that a little bit more?
well, I mean, the if you're just going to hammer away and hammer away and hammer away and hammer away and hammer away at something, sooner or later
De-
you just break everything. And at some point, you gotta like you're using that hammer to hammer in like a nail or a point, and like, okay, we've got the point in. Let's put the hammer down until we just keep going and hammer like Super Mario Brothers, hammer away the whole universe here. You know.
well, we're okay. So we're going a little bit off track from the outline, but I think this is good.
Mhm.
But so so you're talking about hammering as like deconstructing, breaking, so showing the flaws in different levels of ideological logic, right?
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
So what to me that reminds me of Descartes, right? Descartes, he applied ultimate skepticism. It's like the superficial ideology is I can trust what my eyes are telling me, and he's like deconstructing his own vision, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it seems like there was something valuable in that process where after his deconstruction, he found something solid at rock bottom and he built from that. So do you think that there's some value if you can find the sturdy stuff?
Oh, sure, but that's what I mean is like finding the sturdy stuff sometimes isn't there, and so
Mm,
if you're just going until something like breaks apart, or maybe you could call it bad faith, but I wouldn't call it bad faith all the time in the Socratic method. It's just that at some point you're asking questions about something that that the two people involved really are kind of beyond that thing. So it gets a little bit patronizing, if that makes any sort of sense. Like we know what we're talking about here. And so we're asking a question of a thing that, that sitting here and getting back and breaking down to fundamentals behind that becomes like a tedious process, or maybe intentionally tedious process.
mm,
Especially when it comes to things like definitions and ideas like that. But I mean, I think totally the point is to find like a ground point in that sort of deal, and go back and back and back. But
mm,
I just think it can get overdone, and it can also, especially if two different people know that they're, it's different if like you set up like, hey, we're going to do this Socratic method and break down, we're going to do this. But if like you kind of know, it feels a little bit to me like the missionary questions. Like it's like somebody sitting down, and we used to have, I don't know if you were around like the missionary guidebook from years ago, but the missionary guidebook had like this way to ask people's questions down and break them down, and just keep going until you get them. Well, it feels a little bit like if you put the Socratic method to use, and the other person's not kind of aware that they're in the game with you, that
mm.
you're doing a missionary guidebook on them. If that makes any
So
sort of sense.
so basically it can be weaponized is what you're saying, right?
Totally,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but also not. Sometimes the person can be perfectly good faith, and it can just be a time waster too. Um,
Mm,
um,
yeah.
is my point. But at the same time, it's also great. It's also awesome. So every tool in the world can be a weapon or a tool, right?
Ah, good
Yeah.
point. Good
Yeah.
point. So yeah, we were gonna try to do something like a little bit of a political dialectic today to kind of go. So so tell me what you think of this. The type of dialectic that I seem to envision as like the goal, right? So there's lots of different styles. The type that I think is valuable is the type where you treat each other as partners in the quest for truth and goodness, right? Like like truth, it's kind of vague. Goodness is kind of vague, but it's like you both have this vague North Star and you're trying to work together. You recognize you have different perspectives, but it's kind of like you're triangulating onto the goal. It's like I've got my perspective of the goal, you've got yours, and with we can balance out each other's biases to get closer to the goal, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I would call the Platonic dialectic. That's kind of another way to describe how I.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. All of these dialectic. It's hard because like every scholar has got a different interpretation on
Yeah, and the
every
Socratic
dialectic.
the Socratic comes from Platonic, right? You know what I mean? But at the same time, yeah, well, at least the Platonic dialectic, from how I've heard Vervaeke describe it, and I just strongly agree with that. Which I think how
Yeah.
you describe it there is pretty close to
Okay.
the idea. Yeah.
Sure. So yeah. Platonic dialectic, it is.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I wanted to talk about is where do you think like political biases come from?
I think that you have to put into it, like everything in the world, nature and nurture. They're
Mm,
both. Like it's people's what's the word for it? The temperaments are a part of it, and their life experiences entirely are part of it. Like
right.
it's everything, you know. And
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I've heard that like what openness is correlated with progressive political leaning, conscientiousness is correlated with like right wing politics.
yeah, entirely. But I mean, I do think life experiences in certain situations can change things. I mean, I know that they've changed me, like over time, and both one way and the other way. And
Right.
but my temperament, I know the physical has changed my political outlook in weird ways, if that makes any sort of sense.
The physical. What do you mean by physical?
My embodied being, it has
Oh.
changed my more than my mind process. My embodied being, I fully believe, has altered some of my politics. Yeah.
You mean like your daily activities, like
Yeah.
physical
Just
activities?
just where you aim, where you direct yourself, how you act, how you move,
Mm,
physical pain you go through. I mean, I've
mm,
also noticed that. I've brought that up with you. I mean, I don't know if it's
mm,
telling tales out of school, but some other people. But I strongly believe, I know this from a lot of the lives of the philosophers I've studied. So many different philosophers lived with different types of chronic pain, and
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's a big reason a lot of them became philosophers. You know what I mean? And I don't know if people know about it. You can cut it out. You're the one who has the editing skills, but you're laid up on that couch right now because you got chronic pain, and
Yep.
you're also becoming like a hardcore philosopher. And I don't think there's much difference in that. You might look at me and you see my body, and I'm a little bit muscly. There's not there, some people pointed it out on the internet and sorts of stuff like that, but the conservative world of mine is tied into that a little bit, if that makes any sort of sense. Like it's like
The
there's
whole
embodied reasons why people start landing on
mm.
their perceptions and concepts.
So what you're telling me makes my mind immediately jump to the concept of locus of control, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that one of the big divides between left and right biases is like an internal locus of control, which is like I determine my destiny, my choices, my responsibility. I can be successful or unsuccessful. It's all up to me. Whereas the external locus of control, it's societal factors. It's the luck of the draw, and did you get good parents? Kind of that determinism perspective of, oh, you grew up in poverty, that's why, stuff like that.
100%. But it's so funny because I actually just heard somebody else wondering about this the other day, and I don't know what it is. But strangely enough, on the conservative side, who have that stronger, maybe look towards internal locus of control, are also more likely to have the ultimate external locus of control, which is the God side of it. So it's like this weird paradox in there. But um,
Since when have humans been afraid of paradoxes and contradictions?
yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So what is your take on that locus of control issue? And that's kind of connected to free will. Do you have any thoughts
So I was
that?
just listening to Daniel Dennett just this morning, was on with Michael Shermer, and he was going on for an hour, and he talked a lot about his free will stuff. I strongly align with Daniel Dennett on that stuff over the Sam Harris stuff,
Mm,
but maybe even more so for pragmatic reasons than officially a problem of what's true or not. That I mean, I do think that you know, we need to, as he would put it. Hold people responsible for their bad choices and praise them for their good choices in a society for anything to ever get anywhere or to
mm.
perhaps help create or make a society that makes any sort of sense. And locus of control, that obviously plays a portion into it. I definitely believe, if it's true or not, if a person believes that they have it, maybe that would determinately lead them towards making better choices. So like I get the paradox in that too. But I have a belief that the belief in it works. The belief in like a locus of control will play to the benefit of the actor and the people around them. But that doesn't also mean that there aren't external factors in the world to take in consideration at any point in time. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
what do
Yeah,
you?
I think I agree with that. It's growing up, as Mormon, it's like you're raised with free agency. I feel like that ideology imbibed me with a strong internal locus of control. Like from a young age, I had this like I can do anything if I put my mind to something and just work for it, and like with a little bit of God's magic help sprinkled in, I can do anything. And mhm.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to cut you.
Oh yeah. And so like because I had that like unstoppable mentality, it's like it probably gave me more dopamine than usual, and dopamine pushes you towards your goals. And I accomplished a ton of goals in my youth. Like I skipped 3 grades, graduated high school at 15, graduated college at
Whoa. I didn't know that
18.
about you.
Yeah, and so like I was just on fire because I had all of this like I was programmed to have extra dopamine is how I would think of it. So
That's
like
awesome.
I totally think that like this internal locus of control can be helpful to have extra motivation. But in an ultimate sense, I don't believe in free will. Like in the metaphysical sense, I think we're a slave to like the particles, right? But you can manipulate those particles in beneficial directions, right? That's how I would think of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to put it. The reason you said that is because we were talking earlier about a time somebody said something mean to me and it snapped me out of a thing. And what you were saying about the rah, rah, rah stuff, one time he was some sort of, I can't remember what sort of grad student he was. I think it was in music, but part of his music was like the cognitive abilities of grasping music. And I came in with this rah, 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 anybody can do it type thing. And the guy smacked me down, like just like, no, anybody can't just do it. What are you talking about? You knucklehead, and at that time frame, I mean, it was a long time ago, but like the whole thing jarred me and made me stop. And so this is a point for the side of the external locus of controls type stuff. But I got smacked down by somebody who pushed me off the rah rah thing, and it really made me stop and go, wait a minute, Chris, wait, this is true. No, not everybody can do music the same, no matter how much they practiced or didn't practice. Like, this is a truth. And it was one of those areas that somebody did kind of snap me out of it by calling me a knucklehead. But
Yeah.
what you just said as well is I believe, the ratatouille thing, anybody can cook type deal, and that might be a little bit easier. And I know I can't cook. But anyway, I'm sure I could get better. Anybody could get a little better. Anybody could get a little better if they go thinking in that sort of way. But there is also a truth that no, there's some people who are just tonally not gonna get it in music, or even beyond tonally. Like there's fingers, and then I also know in myself, because it's so much of the world that I say kind of alters my perception, is that there was this. I shouldn't go into transition talking about a book that I couldn't even like recite the name of it, but it goes all the way back to the 50s, that there was some sort of concept that people would get different perceptions if they went and did physical activities in the world, such as playing an instrument or working out, and they would they'd run into their walls of where they have problems. And I know from like years of playing guitar and all that sorts of stuff that I a lot of people would think, wow, you're super good. But I also know where my walls are, where maybe I can even still get better, but like something didn't come naturally to me, that there's somebody who's a little, like maybe the average Joe wouldn't even know that guy's better than me, but I know he's better than me. And I know where my wall is with that guy. And like, no matter how much I work at it, like like there's certain finger speed. I'm not going to catch this guy, and you just run into reality.
Right, for sure. It's funny you mentioned cooking because that's one area I've been trying to improve personally, but I feel like I have zero affinity for cooking. No,
Yeah.
no matter how hard I try to learn, like every time I make it, I'm like, oh, this tastes horrible. Like, what am I doing?
Yeah, I'm terrible at it. I think it's funny that I'm terrible, and it's funny because like people will watch like a musician play or a sports person play. I sometimes, a lot of people know too that I kind of have strict diets and that sort of stuff. But then I'll watch the food channels endlessly, and I'll watch like chefs, like they're my celebrities. Like, whoa, he's doing stuff that I can't even imagine. Into it's like everything's like amazing to somebody if it's something you can't do. So,
Yeah.
but
So there was a like a study in like there was a study on cockroaches that it was kind of, it changed my paradigm for thinking about political biases, if you would believe that.
mm,
Like the politics of cockroaches just blew my mind. But obviously that's an exaggeration. But tell me what you think of this. The summary of the study, according to my recollection, is basically there's at least two types of personalities within cockroaches. There's
mm,
like there's kind of a hunter gatherer explorer personality. He's adventurous. He can tolerate the risk of predators. He's not scared. He's brave enough to go into uncharted territory to go find the food. And then there's another personality of cockroaches that's, high anxiety, risk adverse. They're always hiding in dark corners. They very rarely, branch out into new things. And to me, it was very striking. And from an evolutionary perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Like if you're iterating through like eons of evolution, like extinction is like the number one threat to like life. And so if every single cockroach is, really brave and he ventures off into the unknown, and then like a flock of like birds swoop down and like just eat up all the cockroaches, like, oh, your population of cockroaches, it was stupid to pursue a singular strategy, right? They had a singular strategy and they just got eaten up. But
yeah.
if you diversify your strategy, half of them get gobbled up, but then the hiders can reproduce, and like a new generation of explorers is born. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally think the sides need each other for sure, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I agree with it in modern day politics. In fact, I've been on both sides of it. Like I will frequently joke that we're only temporarily conservative, and we're a type too. We're a type that's I've seen Jeffrey Miller talk about it, and he's a evolutionary psychologist, but. Um, there's certain types of people out there, and you might call it like the guys of us who are on porch time, who are just going to be, no matter what, they're going to kind of resist whatever a bucking trend is like around them. And
Mm.
all of us at one point or another were the ones bucking the trends of the conservative side when it was dominant too. And I've seen James Lindsay describe it like it's like holding like a, if you ever like played with a baseball bat and you're holding the baseball bat up standing on end like this, and you have to move with the baseball bat to keep it going and keep it up. And then the one thing you're trying to not do is grab the baseball bat,
Mm.
because then you'd start hitting with it. But
Mm.
if we're going to keep this baseball bat holding on end where it's not being grabbed, we gotta go this way, we gotta go this way, we gotta go this way. And I would say that's kind of generally how we are. And we're all kind of fully like aware that like if certain things, and it might just be regional too for how our region is, but because if we were in another region where we were around something else that was dominant, we'd probably be bucking against that too. So there's the types that were just kind of always kind of bucking about what's dominant around them.
Sure. That makes sense. I love that analogy, and I totally agree. It's kind of you've got a balance. Balance seems to be a fundamental principle of the dialectic.
For
And it's
sure.
like if one side is too extreme, the counterbalance brings it to the equilibrium. That's the best
Yeah.
strategy, right?
for sure. But yeah, obviously, that's only some of, if you're talking about the entire beings inside of a species, that's only going to be a small minority of them. Most of them are going to be on one side or the other, like you were saying with the cockroaches. And, but you need both. You for sure need both. There's no way to get out of not needing both, you know?
Right.
And
So I think I want to show a YouTube video now. Let's see, share screen. Let's see, this one. Okay, do you see that? Is it popping up into full view?
yeah, yeah, I see the screen. Yeah, it's full view.
Okay, this is the animation that I was telling you at the beginning that scared the crap out of me a couple of years ago.
Oh, I think I've seen this. Yeah, so it's separating out more.
Yeah. So that did that scare you as much as it did me when you first saw that?
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think I already sensed that it was that way. That it became the association, the freedom of association had it's been a large part of what's been a a point of struggle and worry with me as well. Just the simple fact that like people can't seem to talk at all, or interact at all, or even be seen with each other at all across divides, and especially worse if it gets up at the legislative level, But yeah, what might lead to civil war or not is just kind of precisely exactly that, and then all you have to do is like toss in the crisis in the middle of it, which we've still weathered through one or two of those already since that's happened, but it's still just around the corner that one that could like tip it over could just pop up.
Well, for me, the most shocking and disturbing thing about that was the trend.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like we've got a trajectory here. This is a 60-year trajectory, and it's like it's just steadily getting worse and worse and worse. I'm like, when I see that trend, I'm like, this is not a sustainable trend. Like that's going in a bad direction.
yeah. Have you ever thought of or looked at the concept though that trend reiterates, just like humans reiterate, just like a person reiterates, or something like that? Like that's the
Right?
trend of it. That's maybe the trend of a nation, you know.
Oh, you
Um,
mean historically? It's like the collapse of empires, basically.
yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a really optimistic way to interpret it.
Because I mean, I don't think I believe in the stuff of like no history you're doomed to repeat it type stuff,
Mhm.
and things are cyclical, but then they're also not exactly cyclical.
Yeah.
There's just trends. It's just like a human body.
Mhm.
Every human body is not the same. It doesn't die at the same age, or it doesn't fall apart at the same age. But there's a trend, and our nations under that same trend that all other empires or nations have been under themselves. And maybe it's just something that has to happen. Maybe balkanization is just part of reality, you know.
Mm.
But
Yep. Yeah, it could be that way for sure. Do you think there are any significant factors contributing to it?
well, the internet, which strangely enough, it was supposed to bring us all together, for sure. But we're just in the starting of trying to understand this thing, and if you
Yeah.
think about like all the change that happened from the Gutenberg press, 400, 500 years, I heard this joke once. It was a joke about, actually it was, I think it was actually just said naturally, but it came out as a joke. But somebody asked some Chinese diplomat, what they felt about the French Revolution. And that Chinese diplomat said, I don't know, we'll find out. And that's the same thing with like the Gutenberg press, is like, we were just barely figuring out what it was like to have that information around in the world. And now we're just still in the first 20 years of the internet, and it's only getting stronger. Like we can't even comprehend how much is going to be changed and changed forever from it. And we're
Right.
just barely, not even figuring it out, not even starting to.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. Social media, internet, it's really such a novel thing, and I totally agree with you. It's kind of this. I think of it like a double-edged sword, where as like it has the potential to divide us. The whole echo chambers and confirmation bias. You're finding what information you want that helps you divide more, but it also probably has the potential to bring us together. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the algorithms. So, like, an algorithm could be in favor of like bringing you down the rabbit hole of like extremism. So it's possible to like get more and more extreme because the algorithm is supporting that. But if you tweak the algorithm, you could program it to say, oh, for every right-wing video you watch, I'm going to suggest a left-wing video. I'm going to try to counterbalance your perspectives. You could build that into the algorithm. You know what I mean?
But what would be the incentive to do that? Or like, how would you incentivize the companies to actually follow that, and not just go with what, I mean, because we've watched it happen in the news over the years, right? The news used to pretend to have a centrist, or I wouldn't even call it centrist, like an unbiased opinion, and just bringing you the news. And now every single one of them slowly moved into just pretty openly kind of stating where they are, which in one sense of the word, I think that's generally good, because it wasn't true that they were unbiased before. But at the same time, too, you see the balkanization happening. Like, you watch this news, I watch this news. We're different people, and what one of the incentives for that whole entire thing is they kind of had to do it financially. Like, to keep going or staying alive, they had to get their niche audiences, and
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I'm not sure what the solution is. Do you pay attention to Daniel Schmattenberger much?
you've shown them to me a couple times, but and like, I don't keep track of them like hardcore,
Mhm.
but I've seen a bunch of his videos.
Yeah, he's one of the people I looked up to. It seems like he's interested in a lot of the things I'm interested in, and he's just absolutely brilliant. And he breaks it down like this. He talks about the meta crisis. The meta crisis is basically, well, first there's an acknowledgement that there are many potential crises on the horizon, right? Like there's a lot of novel stuff, and all of this novel stuff could be dangerous, if not civilization ending. You know what I mean? AI risks, biotechnology risks, building your own virus. Terrorism could hack into any of these novel technologies, and it could just erupt. And like perhaps the epistemic crisis is revolving around people don't know who created this virus, and it just creates chaos. So there's 1,000 different new ways of devolving into chaos, and that's kind of the meta crisis is like an acknowledgement of that, and an investigation into what are the underlying patterns that are feeding into all of these crises. So like if we investigate the meta crisis, maybe we can figure out the patterns, we fix those patterns, and we solve 1,000 problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that concept, which is yeah, that sounds pretty interesting to me. It's so interesting with all this that you see. The more there's one great big thing, the more there's balkanization and all. So much of what the push of the internet has done has obviously shown, and it used to be like something whispered under the breath of people, like they're going to use this to try to form one giant world government. And if you think back to it, it's like, why wouldn't there be a pressure to do that? I mean, that'd be obvious. Of course, if we're now all able to connect in a certain way, there would be a pressure to become like this grand unifying thing. But at the same time, too, that same exact tool becomes the thing that balkanizes just as hard. So the thing, there's such a weird ebb and flow of like the thing that binds everything together is also the thing that makes the universal also makes all the particulars. And I think there's something in that of what you're saying there. Like if we look at the universal, it'll help to address the particulars, and if the particulars are addressed kind of one by one, I don't know. It's a weird cosmic jag you just got me down in my brain there. Like the universals and particulars, or the all binding process, balkanizing things out, or the balkanization then being used to create an all binding large universal process.
Are you talking about some type of accelerationism here?
Yeah, it does. But I mean, I don't know how, like what you just said with that guy wouldn't be a little bit of the same thing, like saying if you're looking at addressing the big thing, how it wouldn't help solve all the little things. And I mean, that's once again, we're going all the way back to Plato. It's the original stuff. It's like, are we looking at the universal thing, or are we looking at the particular things? And actually, there's a little bit of a differences. That's a difference between Aristotle and Plato. That's also, some people look at that as saying maybe a difference politically between a right and a left type side of thinking. But
so
go ahead.
So let me take you to the next level of Daniel's thinking and tell me what you think.
Yeah.
So basically, Daniel, he sets up this paradigm where with the Meta Crisis, you've got these two, he calls them poles, right? And like in like mathematics or whatever, in geometric mathematics, a pole is like a density gradient, where it's kind of like this attractor zone. And so you could think of it like there's these two black holes, and we're like a little asteroid, and we're like traveling between two black holes. And these two black holes, one of them is chaos and one of them is tyranny, right? It's like we've got all of these problems. Maybe we're going through an asteroid field. One of the asteroids, there's 1,000 asteroids. One of them is going to knock us into chaos. One of them is going to knock us into tyranny, because like in order to resolve all this chaos, you need a tyrannical system, right? It's like, anyone can build like a virus weapon in their basement. Therefore, we need a super state that's like investigating everyone's homes and sending in, doing crazy lockdown stuffs because we got to control this problem. And so Daniel, he sets it up to where we've got these two issues, these two poles. Nobody wants either of those. Like nobody in their right mind wants either of those as a result for society. And so what Daniel offers is the generation of a third option, a third pole. He calls it the third attractor, and basically creating this third black hole, attracting us towards something good. And basically what he's saying is we want to create an emergent order. So tyranny, it creates a forceful order. Tyranny is top-down order. And so he's hoping to create bottom-up order. So you get the same benefits without the coercion.
I like that concept of it. It sounds a little bit like if I was to put it into like a political realm, like kind of what anarchists think. It's a little bit like an anarchist libertarian concept, is that the order will come out of not top down, but I don't know. I'd have to see more of like what he thinks that works. But I mean, I take into account the concepts of anarchists and libertarians like all the time, and Daniel Dennett, once again, just today on Michael Shermer's podcast, he was talking about rules and the need for rules, and that we want rules and society's rules. But then that gets the point once again of like, are those rules being emergent, or are they? Because an anarchist will talk about, well, those rules emerge. One of the things they'll talk about is like over at a mall, who need to make the roads at the mall, like who need to make the pathways between the buildings at the mall. It just emerges from the people wanting that. And then the other side will say, no, you need somebody to come in and decide we need these roads between these places.
Mhm.
And that's maybe no big deal when you're talking about roads or stuff like that, but it gets harder when it gets to those fringe fighting subjects, what are the wedge issues, you know. But I don't know. I'd have to see how he. I mean, maybe is he modeling it out in computers or something like that, or talking about how it might emerge?
Yeah, I don't know enough of his work to know his solutions. From my perspective of his work, it seems like he's trying to educate people about the problems, educating people about the goals, and it seems like he's working on the solutions behind the scenes, and he's hoping more people will work on the solutions behind the scenes, but he's not claiming to have the solutions as far as I'm aware.
Hmm.
But I think where he's going, a lot of it is around altering the incentive landscape. And so, like you, what precipitated me going this route was you talking about the perverse incentives of media or social media.
Yeah.
They want to feed you what you like. They feed you your biases and let you go down the rabbit hole of extremism because they have this perverse incentive of profit over social stability. You know what I mean? And so, like, maybe Daniel would advocate some legal structure that says we're going to tax the media companies for social instability. And so, like,
Hmm.
we're going to attack you. Like, if you follow the profit, we're going to attack that profit, and we're going to reward the opposite approach.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, I think incentives are a good starting point for stuff for sure. Incentive and punishment, right?
Right. Like,
Um,
as the whole concept of externalities, bringing the cost of the externality into the profit structure.
you still get to the point of like the universe of problems, like who decides that? You know, who watches the Watchmen? You know, it always gets kind of one layer deeper in examining or deciding. You know, but
Yeah, for sure. And that's another aspect of Daniel's perspective is we need to level up the education of the people. If the people have higher philosophic education, they might be able to make these judgments more astutely, right?
maybe. We'll see. I don't know. I think you've seen and we've seen people get kind of better at philosophy, and it doesn't much change their temperament or I mean, like we started out talking, like even people can weaponize philosophical ideas and do a whole lot. But and then there's the other level of like, can they get? Again, we were talking about the musical thing. Can they get the musical stuff? Well, the truth of it is like, can people get some of these philosophical or abstract concepts? I mean, a lot of different ideas about IQ levels, if they're true or not, is people's ability to abstract or think abstractly.
Mm,
And sometimes that's not there. And that's just
mm,
like tonality is not there. Sometimes abstraction is not there.
for sure.
And
I guess, are you trying to say you lean pessimistic towards this emergent order solution?
this is my conservative bona fides coming out here. Is Eileen Thomas Sowell with on most things is that there's no answers, only trade-offs. You know, so you get rid of one solution or one thing that kind of gets gamed and um, becomes corrupted, and you put in an oversight committee to deal with the corruption, and then that thing is just a trade-off to another thing that will then become corrupted.
Mm,
But you know, Steven Pinker will also kind of talk about that same stuff and say, "Yeah, but that's how the world is. Like you address a problem, which then will create more problems, and you address that problem, and that's the universe. So just keep doing it." And his belief is that there's a progression towards things getting better that way. Although then I also listen to the side of, if you know of Oswald Spengler, The Decline of the West, his whole concept is he talks about um, he largely talks about societies living like a human organism, like they're going to die, and even one of the concepts they even put behind it is like, if you think of like the life stages of a butterfly,
Mm.
what comes after butterfly? It's
Mhm.
not super butterfly. It's death. It's death. Like that's normal. You know,
Yeah.
that's his talk about stuff. Although maybe you could become a transhuman butterfly, and that's one
Eh,
of the concepts we're coming to. Is like maybe all this tech stuff will help us survive a death, and even help this society survive a death, because we're going to
mm.
cyborg out into something that
Mhm.
can then grow beyond what was natural.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah,
but
totally. Um, just a stupid side note. I learned a couple months ago that butterflies, when they so the caterpillar, he can creatures that have brains can learn things. The caterpillar can learn things. When the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, my understanding is his brain completely like melts to nothing, and then it like rebuilds for the butterfly. But some of the memories of the caterpillar are retained in the butterfly,
wow.
despite the complete rebuilding of the brain.
That's really interesting, because that goes in line with Dennett. If you listen to Dennett on Shermer today, he was just talking about like one of the reasons we can't think like a monkey or learn to think like a monkey. This Wittgenstein gets in all this stuff too. Wittgenstein says if lions could speak, they'd have nothing to say to you because they're lions. There are whole different things that we still wouldn't be able to communicate with them because they're so different mentally. Um, but he was talking about the only way that you could really think to be a monkey is first you have to forget entirely of being a human, because you
Mm.
can't have that meta level to know of it. And that's that same concept here, but maybe it happens with the butterfly. But that, I mean, that's a great like little idea or metaphor, just like the concepts of like growing into, like I can't see differently too, if like talking about transhumanist stuff or moving on to the next realm, how you don't move on to whatever that is without completely killing what was there before. But maybe there's little bits of a caterpillar that
Right,
can carry over. But
right, exactly. So I have a question for you. Hot take time.
yeah,
Can you rank order in terms of desirability, just your personal perspective, your personal bias? What what's the number one? I'm going to give you three things. Rank order number one desirable and least desirable. Order them for me. Uh, Civil War, a national divorce along party lines.
what was the first one? I think, or is that number two?
Well, Civil War
Civil
is the
War. Okay, that
yeah.
it glitched. Okay, Civil
Oh,
War.
sorry. Yeah, Civil War, a national divorce, like where we disintegrate the United States into the, 50 independent states doing their own thing or whatever. And the other would be a one world government.
Ugh. Well, I mean, definitely national divorce. I'd put it at the top. Uh, I think that would be the best out if those are the only three options.
Yeah.
Um, that would be the best outcome. The second best outcome, civil war or one world government. I'd probably rank civil war higher than one world government, but it also depends on like how tyrannical or not that one world government is. Because I mean, I could imagine a one world government that's not tyrannical. It's just most versions we've ever been presented with or even viewed in fiction are tyrannical versions. But I could imagine a one world government that was a better aimed government. You know.
Were you
Um,
uh were you a Pinky and the Brain fan as a
oh
kid?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
What was his whole line, his whole shtick?
Take over the world. Like, what are we gonna do today, Pinky? Same thing we do every day, Pinky. Try to take over the world. Did
Right,
you ever
right,
did you ever catch the joke of that show? Like, one was a genius, the other's insane. That the one who was a genius was Pinky, and the one who
right.
was insane was the brain.
Oh, yeah. I was too young to get any of the deep messages.
Go look at it. If you signal it, it signals it all the way through. Pinky's totally the genius. And because,
Really?
like, if you look all the way through it, he's able to do all sorts of weird math problems or construct all sorts of different things and is really, really great at stuff. And the one who's insane is the one who's trying to do the same thing and fail over and over and over and over again.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. For me personally, I think I would, what you said, national divorce, civil war, and the one world government. So I think I would flip one in, well, how would I do it? I think I would do one world government first, actually. I would do national divorce second, and I would do civil war last. So I guess I lean more optimistic than you. I'm more hopeful that we could create a less tyrannical, less abusive one world order. Because the way I view the federal government, like the American federal government, it's kind of like a meta government, right? We've got state government and we've got this like meta government, and like if you it kind of is like a one world government just from the perspective of the country. You know what I mean? From the state perspective, we have a one world government, and then you just zoom out and a one world government, it would just be kind of like a federal layer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say that's one of the areas where there's definitely a divide on that concept between the right and the left, or what you would call the political right and left, because the federalism of the U.S. If you ultimately look at what the right wing people believe, is that they believe that we are 50 different states, and the federal side should be very, very minimal, maybe like just there for some national security, and that's about it. And that
Right.
each state should control its own future. If you get into current day right wing dissident, you call it like dissident political philosophers, all the way to Alexander Dugin, who is the guy that they say Putin takes his orders from, although there's some contestation of that. But that guy's fourth way that he talks about is ultimately entire global balkanization, which is in some ways what we've already had, in the sense of that we already had all these different little countries, these different sovereign nations and places. But his view for the future is divvying it up in places where, and I talked to some other anarchists who kind of believe this, in right wing anarchists who believe this similarly, of that what I want, I don't want no laws. What I want is many, 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 many different places and many, many different laws, and me with the freedom to go choose the one that I want to go to, and not just be stuck in one single place of. And if you look at, I've talked about him before, you might know him, but Curtis Yarvin, who is Mencius Moldbug, who's become a big name and that sort of
Oh,
stuff. That
yeah,
guy's idea, he wants to return to king, like return to monarchy. And a
yeah,
lot of the right people want monarchies, but if you really listen to them, what they talk about is they want many small kingdoms of monarchs. They don't
yeah.
want one global monarch, and because they think that that's the way the world would best serve itself. That you have all these different places, and you could go choose the one and the monarch, and that monarch actually cares for your little region enough that it has your they have your same end goal in mind, of like their life. Your life depends on their life, but their life depends on your life. So they actually care about you. It's not this detached, bureaucratic, shark-eyed type thing that's just trying to make lines go up on graphs. It doesn't have to go to that extreme, but I would say that on the conservative side of stuff, they lean more towards, now each of us in our 50 different states, you can choose what the crap you want over there in Colorado, but we got our thing over here in Utah, and us down here in Florida, we have our thing. And if somebody wants to move over to that, we want to move over to that. And I actually, not only do I think that's something I would conserve and preserve, but I also do land on the side of, there's something to be cherished in like the different ethnicities kind of around the world that exist and exist in regions. Like in my view, it's like, I don't think Ireland should go away for a multicultural super unified future or something like that. The concept of who the Irish are or who the Swedish are or who every different region. Of course, that stuff's going to naturally change at some point or another in the world, but that there's some sort of a traditional value to these ethnic enclaves all over and around the world, and one world society. Part of the ideas and people are getting so frustrated about is the ultimate concept that things must be propagandized into becoming just one singular world culture, which not only does that present problems in if it works or not, but there's also something lost. There's something lost in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I largely sympathize with that. I totally love the diversity of, different cultures. I served my LDS mission in Taiwan. I love, Chinese food and all that type of stuff.
What is it way better that I'm sure, and this is always the truth, but like, is the Chinese food here even anywhere? Can you get the same stuff at all?
So the interesting thing about Chinese food is it's very regional. So you could divide China into different quadrants, or and each one has its own style, and Taiwan is kind of its own style in a way. But I fell in love with the Western China type of food, which it's like their key ingredient is they call it the huajiao, like a flower pepper, and it's like it has this attribute of being numbingly spicy. Like
Mm,
it like bubbles on your tongue and it gets you all numb, and it's just like this amazing experience. Like
mm.
like drinking water afterwards, the water is like bubbling on on your tongue, and it's just really it's a really fun spice to have. Just yeah,
That'd be
it's
interesting to try.
they some restaurants here are authentic enough to have it, but like Panda is like not even close to authentic enough. Yeah.
What do they speak there? The Mandarin or the Cantonese?
Taiwanese speak Mandarin, but like they used to. Well, China unified every. China did this top-down tyranny of everyone has to learn Mandarin. They did that before the division between China and Taiwan, but locally, China there's tons of little dialects, and the dialects are almost their own language. And so Taiwan, they speak two languages. They speak the Taiwanese dialect and Mandarin.
See, I mean, it's one of the things we'll find out with the internet in the future. But in the past, the truth of it is the balkanization always happens, kind of like we were talking about. But to speak against, like to speak of Spangler as well, like the Irishness, whatever the Irishness is, was always going to die too. Maybe it gets accelerated, but that's not. It's not forever of all time. Like whatever that sort of thing um, has a lifespan too, if you're to believe that sort of idea. But maybe the internet world, we will all homogenize into like one ethnicity and one language and sorts of stuff. And especially as like the whole entire world spends more time over generations indoors and then unifies in language, maybe that'll happen. But the balkanization, I mean, in history, I mean, I studied the history of Spain too, and I know it's like this way in China too, is that all the efforts to make one big thing, like look, what is the Spanish Empire now? That's the direction that it goes, and it separates out, it balkanizes out, and people
Yeah.
fight to become their own different little enclaves and for their own different little destinies. And I don't see that fight stopping, even though there's mechanisms now to make a larger world government. And then the only way that seems to me that they'll ever actually get a one world government is maybe they could do it for peaceful means, but it sure seems like all the push is towards more tyrannical or controlling means,
Hmm.
in my view.
Interesting. So I have two angles that I want to address this with you. This what do you want to call it? The dichotomy between would it be right to call it balkanized states versus one world government? That
Yeah,
dichotomy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I want to try to go the evolutionary angle and go the meta crisis angle, the Daniel Schmattenberger angle. So the evolutionary angle is the trend of evolution seems like it's we're emerging towards larger and larger structures of social order, right? It's like we start in like these tribes of 150 people, and it's like if you can figure out how to organize at a larger layer of analysis, you're more powerful in like tribal war. So like if you can unite 500 people around a mystical god, you can overpower a smaller tribe. And then if you can unite people into a state, then you can overpower these little mystical tribes. If you can unite all of these states into the United States, then you're even more powerful. You've got a higher level of unity. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so to me, it seems inefficient. Like the smaller tribal layer, it's inefficient because there's all this friction, right? All this friction, they kill each other, and then when you unify, it reduces friction, becomes more powerful, more sustainable. It seems evolutionarily favored.
It it pushes towards that, but like I was talking about, it also dies. It also undoes. I mean, that's the history of empire, just the same as it's the
Mm.
history of nation. And there's a constant flux, just like chaos and order. There's a constant flux of empire balkanization, and I'm sure the same thing will happen now that tools are there for the. I mean, what do I think would happen over the next 1,000 years? I bet you single world orders are going to pull themselves off, and then they're going to fall apart, and then they're going to pull themselves off, and then they're going to fall apart. That's how that works or not. But the deal is in the middle of that, there's going to be a lot of different fallout, and there's one of the things that people have to just know is true is that when something becomes unified in that sort of way, interests of the particulars get trampled on. Then when it balkanizes out, that doesn't solve the problem. It's just a constant thing. It's just then there'll be certain ones that will be advantaged and certain ones that will be disadvantaged. And then when that goes back to unified, like no matter what, as the good book, the Bible says, like no matter what you have, you're poor or whatever. Like I said with Thomas Sowell's, like there's no solutions, there's only trade offs, and then there's only like flux in these realms, and there's only going to be no matter what, there's going to be a category that gets trampled on, and that's just kind of why, in some sense of the word, my ultimate conservatism is anti-utopian. Like I
Mm.
don't believe there's a utopia.
Interesting. So, in terms of harm, would it be fair? Would it be fair to say? I'm assuming that you would think that these one world, I guess you can call them tyrannies, would cause more harm than balkanized, friction.
It's probably just like a trade-off one way or the other, but I think the one world tyranny would see that's a realm of harm versus other perceptions, and I don't necessarily buy that there's just harm versus not harm.
Okay.
I think that the agency, and you could call it harm, but I think one would provide for more agency, one would cause
Okay.
maybe less harm.
So
But
so we could talk about meta harm.
uh-huh.
So damaging your liberty would be a meta harm, right?
Sure. So if you're looking at that, yeah, I mean, I think it's just always going to be maybe a bit of a wash. It's just in one realm, you have agency, which maybe that's my Mormon bona fides, even though they've changed that up in years. I think agency is a larger necessity for humans than perfect safety and perfect
Okay. Okay.
harmlessness.
So you have a bias towards the liberty harm as opposed to the physical harm, which is why you prioritize the balkanization.
Yeah, not necessarily physical, but I mean, because some of those other harms you're talking about are, I mean, maybe it would be physical, but mental or emotional. Like, people get to those they might call that physical still. But yeah, I mean, I would rank agency as a higher necessity than perfect safety.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. And I would probably have the inverse bias, which probably explains my opposite conclusion.
uh-huh.
Um, okay, so the next part of this is the Daniel Schmottenberger meta crisis approach. Um, so what Daniel Schmottenberger, one of his angles is like different types of problems can be solved at different levels, right? So
Mhm.
if there's a tribal problem, you solve it at the level of the tribe. If there's a family problem, you solve it at the level of the family. Yeah. If there's a state problem, you solve it at the level of state. City problem, level of the city, right? But
Yeah,
and then the point is, if there's a global problem, then you need some type of global governance so you can solve it at the global level.
yeah.
And so to not have a one world government is to say we don't care about solving global problems.
Maybe, I mean, because there's working together from separate sovereignties, but no matter what, they're you know, how close is an alliance or not? I mean, I guess it's kind of depending on, because
Well,
do we not have like a world government right now in some senses? I mean, the UN doesn't really cut it, but I mean, there's like a global alliance well enough in certain areas but there's a polarity in that too.
yeah,
But you're not going to lose that polarity of like the
yeah.
different fighting factions or the sparring to become the leaders of that one world government.
Mm.
I don't know. I
So like just to illustrate the point, like the whole global warming issue, one of the common like retorts is like, well, we can't fix global warming because we're just one state or we're just one country. It's like China is doing way more than us. China needs to fix themselves first before we fix ourselves. You know what I mean? And so like there's kind of that blame game where if there's no global governance, it's like everyone can make excuses to not solve the problem because it's like they do it. They need to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's one of those areas that I as well think that it's probably is best left to non-centralized planning because humans are good at finding solutions to types things, but beyond that too is like, and maybe the moment you say 1, 2, 3, now we're a global government, you have to do our stuff. But there are a lot of concepts about um, industrializing nations suddenly being yoinked that power away when we're already industrialized, and they have not yet themselves had the opportunity to grow in that way. And um, well, maybe you could factor that into how that global governance works, but then that's still going to be viewed as um, your there's more orange juice in their glass than there is in our glass or type deal type stuff. But ultimately, I think it's one of those things that if there was actually just competing factions and competing sides and allowing them to have their own agency to do that, but then also see something else or another place advance farther beyond them with them going beyond that or sort of deal, and then them wanting to come and join that advancing thing. I think that decentralized way would ultimately work better than some centralized top-down authority way.
Mm. So just to further illustrate this problem, imagine the United States, disintegrates into 50 independent states, and
Mm-hmm.
they all pursue different strategies. Some of them are investing into military budget, and some are investing into global warming budget, right? So some are doing short-term strategy, some are doing long-term strategy, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
they get into an argument, and the militaristic state invades the other state, wipes them out, takes them over. So the short term strategy wins, and then they expand, and then like you repeat the process. So like the long term strategy keeps losing, and then suddenly like nobody cares about global warming anymore, and there's after all the militaristic empire takes back all the 50 states, and it's like nobody's looking at the long term because why? It's not a good strategy.
Yeah, I think some of that, I mean, we might see it play out here because we know China has like a longer strategy than the US has. I mean, everything goes quarterly in the US versus uh, some of those Asian countries that are able to sit and abide and wait a little bit longer. And maybe it's just, maybe in the long run, that doesn't turn out to be a good strategy. But the flip end of it too is, as far as like global warming and those types of ideas and the central planning of those types of things, I ultimately don't think it's necessarily at all proven true that the top centralized planning in that deal, like, once again, there's only trade-offs. Humans make energy, humans cause carbon, and almost every single concept that's ever come to ameliorate that is ultimately proved down the road just to be another trade-off and a bunch of BS. And the whole deal that top experts or central are able to figure out how to increase that stuff. I mean, I think they can help with pollution, but if there's a one world governance, well, first off, I mean, I think that warring thing could happen anyway. Even if it's considered like a one world governance, it might be more likely to happen if people get sufficiently irritated.
What
Um,
can you describe what do you think could happen with the one world government?
regions could get dejected and rebel, and do the
Okay.
same type of warring and go rogue, and that other guy, like, the problem doesn't disappear ever of that happening. But um, of course, in that balkanized way, as has been true throughout all history, there's alliances, there's larger worries of people, just rather than these two states are just interacting with these two states, that could prevent such things. But like all things, once again, there's no utopia. Like, none of that's going away. None of that's going away. We don't stop emitting carbon. We don't stop using energy, and we don't stop fighting. And I some of my ideas is this: maybe the only hopes of getting better at those types of things are decentralized people coming up with solutions, and those better solutions winning out in in just in use, in proof. But even then, not to get Malthusian about it, because I mean, I highly disagree with the Malthusians, but the even if we found some sort of way to be more efficient with energy, if we're to be if we are that type of bacteria that just then goes and uses that energy until it then becomes a problem again, it's just an infinite problem there's so much about energy amelioration. I mean, I watched a very long thing about people are worried about the concept of getting rid of meats and pushing people towards using more insect protein. And I watched an entire thing that shows that the insect protein is, for how much is produced and how much it costs and how much fallout, and it's an exact equivalent for the bovine protein. Like,
Really?
there is absolutely no difference in the amount of carbon used and produced if you get the same amount of usage out of out of insect protein as there is for bovine protein. And that's just, that problem reasserts itself again and again and again. Like, if we look at batteries in electric cars and the
Mhm.
types of mining and the destruction of environments that goes with that.
Mhm.
And then if you get to a point where you're reiterating it to a point of doing it across the world where it's used that much, it then just gets to the exact same problem of destruction as any of the other stuff. And I think and then of course you have the Malthusians talking about population problems. And I think that the population problems take care of themselves as well if all you do is push towards maximizing people's education and opportunity. Like, people stop having kids when they have opportunity, when they have a so like, the whole concept of, like, we got to take stuff away from them or they'll keep breeding like rabbits is the opposite of the truth. Like, if you give them more luxury or make it possible for them to have more luxury and more education, that's when they stop having children. And so, I mean, there's so many different concepts of like, I just think, I think ultimately, like, especially if you look at an economist like Thomas Sowell, who's usually kind of getting down to the bottom lines of answers, is very, very frequently the centralized controls cause the problems more than they help them.
Hmm. So yeah, so like so how do I put this? So the Daniel Schmottenberger approach, the tyranny versus chaos, it seems like you're very skeptical of the tyranny, but I guess this emergent approach, the emergent order, you seem to be optimistic about emergent technology and like, I guess like market-based dynamics or natural dynamics, emergently producing solutions, right?
Whatever that is, like the sound of that sounds like exactly the same thing I would argue for. Yeah. It's just then who controls it. But at the same time too, is I believe that there could be a benevolent person. Like if you put that, I can't say his last name. We've put Daniel in charge of it. I believe that he would be the benevolent controller. It's just the problem is it would probably get in the hands, like whoever the person was on top of it would probably be, as is seen in history, a piece of crap.
Yeah.
And if they're not a piece of crap, the next one will be. It won't take long, you know.
But okay, so yeah, to me that seems like the number one concern is like, oh, you're going to get some pseudo Hitler in charge, and it's going to be hell.
That's number one. But I think just as much a centralized planner who just doesn't know the fallout of their decisions and doesn't take those into account
Mm,
can, or a bureaucratic
sure.
enterprise like that could cause as much damage as a Hitler could cause.
Right. But to me, when I hear you say that, I think that's the tyrannical approach. The top down approach is tyranny, the bottom up approach is emergence. And so the emergent approach is less likely to create the problems you're talking about. So the question is, how do you
But how do you
create
have a one world government of an emergent approach? Like,
that's the magic. That's the puzzle to solve. It's how
okay. Well, I'm on
and
board with that if they can do that. Like if it really is like a one world
yeah.
emergent report.
And so where I was going with this was in America, like the founding fathers, they recognized the danger of like an evil king, right? And so they built in checks and balances into the system, right? And they did that what 300 years ago or more.
Mm.
And it's like we've evolved a lot. We've got new technology. We've got new ideas, new ways to measure things. What stops us from creating a more robust system of checks and balances to like stop this one world Hitler from emerging?
I don't see that why there wouldn't be any reason like you couldn't create a similar constitution for the world. It's just I I I would be skeptical that they'd create one as good as that last one. Not that that one's perfect, but I think the new one would be full of all sort of short sightedness to fall out for certain decisions.
Hmm. Okay.
And in some cases, like I don't believe, in many cases, especially with certain leaders at the top, I do not believe that they ultimately have the best intentions for the populace in mind. Maybe some of the populace, um, but that's certain leaders. That's not saying like all of them or something like that. But
Okay. Yeah. I think I can agree with that. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was how do you think that the left and the right can learn to like respect each other? How can we kind of, do you have any ideas for a better dynamic to pull us away from that civil war?
I mean, I'd say it all has to do with, in my view, and nowadays this would label you a certain type of usually political leaner, although it didn't used to be at all. In fact, when I first got these ideas, I definitely leaned the other way. But it has to be free speech and free association, and to use it. Like the talking has to be there, and they have to talk, and they have to be able to say what their actual ideas are and be able to talk through them. Um, I think it all has to do with communication without like all the purity and shaming experience in the middle of the whole entire thing. But I don't know of any other way. It's got to be communication.
Free
But
speech. You said free speech. What was that second thing? Free.
and actually interacting with the free association, but that's
Okay.
actually having the associations too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like less of this neo excommunication culture.
Yeah, which I think happens on both sides. Like as far as like, oh, you're talking with or working with that person, that for sure happens on both sides. Like
Yeah.
you dare talk or work with that person. Oh my goodness, or even think about that person. Or you used to know this person. Like that whole thing's got to stop. You know.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. But to maybe to try to attempt to argue a little bit from the opposite perspective. How do I put this? Like sometimes that purity culture can, I think I would agree most of the times it's a bad thing, but like sometimes it's like one of those factors that wakes you up. Remember you said like sometimes someone got confrontational with you and it woke you up to the reality you were missing something important.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes purity culture can do that. It's like people are so like they're so passionate about something. At first you're like, well, why are you passionate about this? And then it's like an aha moment. It's like, oh, I wasn't thinking of it from that angle. This is kind of important. Maybe I shouldn't be so flippant about that aspect. Do you think?
Well, I mean, I think purity and shame serve a purpose. I mean, they're one of the things that, if there is to be a non-top down authority, purity and shame has to be part of the culture for people to be able to regulate rules without a top down authority. So I'm not saying it's like 100% no. I'm actually just talking right now in this moment of um,
In order to bring towards unity, we need to reduce that purity aspect.
no, I don't think the purity thing's wrong. I think you just still have to associate, like in the sense of even we'll even say in the sense of somebody from a side or a party, and it's even their own side or party, and that person went and talked with other people, and now that person we're going to shame and not talk to that person because that person went and talked with other people.
Yeah.
They're your own side politically, but they went and talked with other people. Oh my goodness. Like
Yeah.
that, whatever
Yeah.
that is has to stop,
Yeah.
you know.
I think I would put that as the extreme purity culture,
Yeah.
that seems fair to put it there, and I would agree that it would be good to reduce that for sure.
Yeah. As far as like stopping other sorts of period, I mean, I don't think some of that, like from the very beginning, we were talking about some of this being physiological. Some of that disgust reaction is just going to be physiological for people, and you can't talk them out of it, no matter how much you'd want to talk them out of it.
Mm.
But uh, I don't know, like how to break past some of that. I think the answer is only talking, or maybe you could take the one layer back and say you don't have to talk with people, but still associate with the people from your side who did talk with the people. If that makes sense, like don't cancel. Maybe you can even be pure and say I don't want to deal with them, but don't cancel the person on your side who will deal with them. Does that make sense? Maybe that
So,
would be like
so like cancel your enemies, but not your open-minded allies. Is that what you mean?
yeah, at least that. Like that could just be like the minimal thing. Like do not cancel your open-minded ally. You can stay disgusted at your enemies.
I, and I
Don't be disgusted with the one who dares to talk to them.
and like I feel so sad that like it comes so naturally for me to
Yeah.
use the word enemy in this conversation. It's like that.
Well,
It's like
yeah,
the fact that that word fits in the political context is like a sad state of reality.
yeah.
You know what I
Although
mean?
that's as old as time, though. I mean, a lot of the a lot of the political philosophers that the right wing uses, it comes from Carl Schmitt, who did run around at the SS, although they doubt that he was like a full believer in that stuff. He was just an opportunist. But his whole framing is friend enemy. Like the only way you can understand politics is who's friend and who's enemy, and they use that language a lot themselves. And I've seen left wingers use Carl Schmitt a lot too, like especially like the political philosophers. But
Yeah. So to go back to the free speech thing, what is your take on the stochastic terrorism argument? I'm assuming you're familiar with that. I can.
yeah, I'm not going to say that that doesn't have merit in it.
Maybe we should flesh that out for the audience just in case.
It's that you saying something could cause another person to go out and do something drastic. Maybe like the best example of it is they used to say, I guess it was like in old king's courts of like, oh, who will rid me of this man over here? And he never said you go kill that person or something like that. But then the next day somebody turns up dead,
Right.
and
Right.
um, people have maybe done a little bit of concept creep and called almost anything stochastic terrorism, because you didn't say who will rid me of this man, but you said something that sufficiently made some other nut job go in and attack you. But I don't think there's zero to that. I don't think there's zero to that at all. I mean, I
You
think
mean you don't think that's negligible? Is that what you mean?
yeah, I don't think it's negligible. Like maybe on either sides. Like we know there's enough nutty people out there, and we have enough reach that how to regulate it, I don't know, but people should be careful with
Mm-hmm.
well, just that exact example. Who will rid me of this person? If somebody was barking that out into the world, one side or the other,
Yeah.
you're probably asking for some nut job to go do it. Especially if you're of a point of high enough ethos that people are gonna somebody out there is gonna do the thing.
Yeah.
Um, um,
And we're kind of in this interesting age, with YouTube. There's kind of all these like these neo gurus, these these like role models that have like this weird type of influence that's like emerging. You know what I mean?
I heard somebody just recently. I'll send you the podcast and forward it to you, because there's this guy who kind of looks at his name's What If Alt History. I think it's What If Alt History, but it's just What If Alt Hist. But he kind of believes, and he's from a conservative viewpoint in general, but he believes like
Just a second. Sorry, you cut out like 3 times. Can you like say that
is
one
it
more time?
is it blipping? I'll forward you this guy. He's a conservative guy. He's called What If Alt Hist, and he's got a pretty good channel that kind of like maybe just from a generally conservative view kind of reviews history and random history, not kind of the typical things like he talks about like the history of Asia and that sort of stuff. But he has a belief that when the reaction comes, and he's not for this, when the reaction comes, it's probably going to be a strong right wing reaction to irritation from some of the poking from the left wing. But what he believes that will ultimately manifest itself in, if you actually do see physical civil war happen, is that there will be different types of, maybe an Andrew Tate army taking off and doing it. It's not going to be coming from some governmental source. It is going to be coming from some what do they
That's
call it, parasocial source on the internet.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and it's hilarious the way you word that, but like, it totally makes sense to me. But
Yeah.
like, if America descended into a civil war, would there be like, the flag of Tate rushing across the Rocky Mountains, and the
he
Jordan Peterson flag going into Colorado?
he 100% thinks like, yes, that's how it would manifest itself if it actually happened. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind
It
of.
might not be those two guys. It might be a new emergent parasocial exciting person, like who's more militaristic, like a Jocko Willink or something like that. But it
Yeah.
would be something like that.
Yeah, because it seems like unity requires like this kind of unity requires like a value framework, like agreement on a value framework, agreement on an epistemological framework. So like an ideology base, a robust ideology. And like maybe these leaders are putting out this ideology. And so it's like they're creating something to unify onto. Uh, you know what I mean?
Yeah, which is the hardest thing to do, which maybe at the same time too, if I go back to like your idea of like the one world government or whatever, is like there's some sort of level with that stuff that I I do think it's on them, and sometimes I think they're smart enough to know that they're not doing this, if that makes any sense. But it would be on them to make it seem, to put the incentive there to make it seem truly enticing or exciting or
So you're saying they suck at
beneficial.
you're saying that telling people to eat insects isn't a good motivator. It's not good PR.
Exactly, like dropping it in their stuff, and some people, well, that's a conspiracy. No, go look at the website; they say it. But the that also just might be like one or two persons inside of their thing pontificating it or something like that. But
Yeah.
there's sometimes where I wonder, because like, so we had the I don't know if you want to talk about it on the internet, because it can like sometimes downgrade YouTube things. So I'll say use code words. But we had the recent disease thing and the medical solution to it. The medical solution to it, like, if I thought about if they actually wanted to use our big galaxy brains and the psychological way to entice people to actually want that,
The
they
vaccine.
had
I mean,
they had the well awareness and the awareness well enough on how to do that the psychological way properly.
mm,
Like if I looked at them and saw like the way they're doing it, I would almost kind of look at them and say, I know you guys are smart enough that you did that the way to irritate. I know that either you're dumb or you were purposefully irritating people into causing a friction right there,
mm,
because you could have done that in a way that was incentivized
mm,
and you guys know how to game psychology better than that. So if I know that you're that way, unless you just have you have your messages mixed up, um, I would have to believe that you guys were smart enough to do that in a way that irritated, and that you did that on purpose.
now you know Hanlon's razor
Yeah,
always assumes stupidity
yeah,
instead of malice, right?
yeah, that's true. And but that might be one of the hard things about the one world government thing, is like no matter what, you have some, because maybe the WEF has better, bigger ideas, and then they're such a big organization, you have one or two knuckleheads going in there and talking about bugs. But then what spreads out is the bug stuff. But you can't control your thing well enough to get the bug guys to not shut up and have that become the message, if that makes sense. Like the irritant rises to the top of the message, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think you're 100% right that like if you want like some grand solution, you're going to need to know like if you want it to be emergent, you got to figure out how to make it appealing. Like
Exactly.
it's persuasion is part of the emergent solution. You know what I mean?
And I'd put that as part of it. Is like number one, like I said from the beginning, is like I could imagine a benevolent one world government, and your emergent idea sounds great to me. It's just they'd also have to prove it in their messaging. It's up to them to make it sound.
Yeah.
Um,
And if they're not smart enough to do good messaging, maybe they're not smart enough to, give policy advice. So like
or
maybe
or because the other end of Hanlon's razor or something like that is that we're going back to the book 1984, and a lot of this types of different stuff is talking about the difference between the Fabians and maybe the James Burnham side of stuff that in England or type deal. But what I'm talking about is like
can you sorry.
maybe they are pushing. Was it cutting out again?
No, I just wanted
Oh.
you to explain the dichotomy you just built. Fabians and what was the other one?
James Burnham, who was basically kind of the, so if you look at 1984, the book 1984,
Mm,
some people just say, he was just talking about Stalin. But no, he wasn't really talking about Stalin. He was talking about factions inside of his own country. He was talking about the Fabian socialists. But the other side of the Fabian socialists, who he was also critical of, was James Burnham, which was kind of a little bit like the right wing dissidents. And he talked about the Machiavellians. And the Machiavellians are he also kind of talked a lot about the managerial class. So he was a bit like a kind of like a right wing dissident of that time frame, and he was a really big philosopher. People should know him a lot better, especially if you read 1984 and Orwell and that sort of stuff, because it's a major influence of what he was pushing back against. And he didn't just have criticism for the socialists; he had criticism for these dissidents as well. But the what I'm pointing at there is what Orwell was pointing at in that book is maybe they were trying to create a polarity. We're always at war with Eurasia. We've always got this second thing that we got to fight. We've always have this China and BRICS that's the other, like, and maybe one of the things pushing against that one world unity isn't that they wouldn't unify, is that there's certain people who think there's Machiavellian ideas of control or influence if we create the concept of a polarity. And we want that division,
Right.
because there are people at that level with that philosophy.
Yeah, that's a very disturbing reality, that some people would want division and want, to divide us, etc.
Even just the appearance of it, even if the division isn't real, just the appearance of it helps them, and they believe that. If you know,
What do you mean by just the appearance?
well, that's what the whole concept is in 1984 of like we're always at war with this other superpolar power, and that's not even real. And
like a distraction, basically.
it's a distraction, but it's also kind of like certain ways it's a Machiavellian way of controlling masses or getting them to act and do a certain way. And that's why I say, when you look up at some of the top people who are the ones sending messaging or doing these things, and some of the stuff just seems like that would so obviously irritate people. Why would you deliver it that way? Like, if you really wanted unity, you wouldn't deliver it that way. It's not because they're idiots. Sometimes it's the opposite of Helen's Razor. Well, maybe it's idiotic that they think that this would work, but they're intentional. Like, they didn't give that stupid messaging because it was just an accidental bumbling thing. They gave it that way because they thought the idea of creating this division would be useful to them. So Hamel's Razor, by way of, because I think that's idiotic. I think I think there could be we could be unified and have unifying messages and not have this concept that we have to have a polarity.
Yeah. So like you brought up like this Machiavellian approach. To me, I would put that at like maximal malice. And what comes to my mind is like kind of this like midpoint of malice, which is like polarization. It's like, oh, the two sides, they don't like each other. And so it's not like this top down maximizing division. What if it's just they're delivering it in a way to aggravate the other side because of kind of polarized malice?
Yeah, and that could be intentional sometimes, and they're perfectly aware that they could be more unifying, and maybe it would work. But they have this. There's the James Burnham's book, which is kind of a more famous one. He also has he had one called The Managerial Revolution, but he has a book called The Machiavellians, and Orwell was kind of talking in response to that too. But there are people who believe that creating that division, I've met it in management, and there's some people like read it in just like business management. They actually believe that if they go and cause like a ruckus over here, that they're going to be able to create some later unity or something like that. And I've met them in person, like in real life, just at a regular business managerial level. And I think it's stupid. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a dumb idea. I believe in what your guy says and what you say, is that there's no reason we shouldn't be talking and fighting without purposefully creating the division. And but I think there's just some people who see use in it, and I would even say that that doesn't always have to be from a point of actual malice. I view it as malice, but there's certain people with those philosophies who actually believe that it's the way to get things done. And
am I correct in interpreting you as talking about like the accelerationist approach?
no, the accelerationist approach. I mean, there's a couple different ways of doing accelerationist approaches, but those are usually, that's actually kind of more of like a bit of a judo concept, because like if I look at it as like the capitalist accelerationist, you could like call some different postmodern philosophers like Guattari and gosh, what's his name, Deleuze, and they had this like weird way of saying, okay, capitalism, but capitalism's so hard we run it off the rails. You know what I mean? But like it's a weird judo approach of like, okay, yes, I accept you. Let's do this so hard we break it. You know what I mean? And so it's like a bit more of a judo thing of like saying of joining in with the thing.
But like it's I guess the acceleration approach. It seems like
Oh,
it's
you're saying
like
acceleration of a war.
so it's like we want the division, but the like maybe the goal isn't civil war, but civil war is a means to the next thing.
Yeah, bring
And
the big
so
conflict up. Yeah, that yeah. As far as warring accelerationists, yeah, yeah, for sure. I was thinking of like economic accelerationists
it,
or computer digital accelerationists.
so it's
Um,
not division for division's sake. It's weapon or it's taking advantage of division as a means to a better end. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
bring about the end times. Well, one of the biggest ones you ever heard in is the word apocalypse now. What's his name? John. I forget his name. The director of that, he was actually saying, because there was a bunch of people who go around with these things that say peace now signs, and that the movie is like an answer to that. And that guy actually was a right-wing accelerationist. If you read about him, his daughter has actually worked in the Trump administration, John Milius, and he's the guy who wrote Red Dawn. If you ever saw Red Dawn
Oh
about
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah.
And so he was all into that sorts of stuff. But if you read it, he's a pretty interesting weird dude. There's actually a documentary on him. But yeah, that's his thing. Apocalypse Now was like, none of this peace now stuff. Like let's have the war and let's get to the other end of this stuff. Yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah.
So, do you think that the right and the left have any core values that can be unified on?
Ooh, I think they can. I think they actually can get core value into disliking those top level Machiavellians. I really do. Like I think those are, and it seems like one of the reasons that division or those polarizing things come up is because those guys kind of start getting that they're on to them. You know
Mm.
what I mean? But I do think that they can like get a unified disgust for the ultimate people enacting malice. I do think that.
So,
Um,
and anti-corruption, basically.
Anti-corruption. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think they
I,
can unify there.
I totally agree. Totally agree with that. Um, so where did it go? I did, I asked ChatGPT what are the common values between the right and the left, and
Oh,
it gave me a really big list. And so I want to go through this with you and to see what you think. So one of them is freedom, and but see the thing about this list is like the right and the left, they have different takes on all of
yeah. It's gonna
these.
be same word, different dictionary. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really it's a weird thing. It's almost like how would I put this? Uh, do do you know? I don't know how to describe it, but it's kind of like playing a semantic game to achieve unity. It's
Yeah.
like we've got two different definitions, but we're gonna pretend it's the same thing for rhetorical purposes. So we're gonna appeal to all of you rhetorically, even though you're interpreting two different things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
That
So
actually kind of reveals the core of the issue too. Oh, yeah.
yeah. So like this, I'll just rattle off this list: freedom, justice, equality, security, family, community, patriotism, national identity, environmental stewardship.
Yeah, I immediately flashed double meanings on every single one of those. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, yeah. Accountability, education, and community service.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this list. Um, the whole freedom thing, the right's take on freedom seems to be like get rid of regulation and let things happen.
To a point, unless it harms my purity, I guess, you know. I mean, I'm under no pretenses that if certain people who I currently agree with got power, that I would hate them as actors in the power position. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, yeah. Are you alluding to the idea of libertarianism when we're not in power and authoritarianism when we are in power? Kind of a dichotomy.
100%, 100%. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have put myself as somebody who could even stand the Daily Wire, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. Like, I wouldn't have. And then in recent years, when they're kind of like pointing out some of the excesses of the left, I find myself in agreement with them. But at no point do I stop and say, boy, oh boy, would I love Matt Walsh in charge of stuff? Would I love Michael Knowles in charge? Like, it's absolutely no, absolutely not. I would not trust those guys in charge of anything,
Right.
you
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree there.
know.
um, so like the left wing's take on freedom, from what I've gathered, it seems like their idea is like you need to be free to pursue your dreams, and so we need to like we need to like augment society with all these regulations so that your life is all cushy and you can go do what you want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I could. What are some other kind of realms of like freedom that? I mean, because like they would probably be more open to freedom of drug use, whereas the right would not be. You
Right,
know,
right, right,
and so there's the right wants their freedom, but then they want to regulate that stuff, and then the left is more freedom oriented on that sort of deal.
right. It's
And
like freedom, except for in the Christian bias territory.
yep, yep. And
Yeah.
that's one of the areas I'm alluding to. I mean, I hear it a lot with the Mormons and stuff we get online with, like, they're pretty libertarian, and then all of a sudden you'll see them drop, I would ban alcohol again. You're like, come on, dude. Like, I don't even drink or anything like that, but I think it's like the dumbest thing on earth to even bring in, start going down that road at all again. And I know if they got put in power, Mormons are generally pretty good at uh, leaving some freedom around, but at the same time, if you gave them full legislative power, they'd go willy nilly with it. And
Absolutely. But yeah, I think the fact that free agency is like built into Mormonism, it kind of helps offset that tyrannical tendency.
a little bit, but then they would. I think they make a pretty good society. That's one of the areas I defend them. But part of that society is that they had to interact with the world at large. They couldn't just 100% decide for us. And if they did get a chance, but even inside of that, they still leaned overly little tyrannical when they had the full power. They still leaned overly rule pushy, overly for their sensibilities. Like you still can't get alcohol in the state except at a state liquor store or something like that. It's it's stupid, and they would go farther that direction if they were given free reign. They'd still leave some agency in the world, but they'd go all the way with that. Like there'd be no alcohol in Utah, and that's just one little thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
And
so like just yeah, the next thing is justice, and like the right and the left, they have way different takes on justice.
yeah,
The right, it seems like they're like, oh, let's punish crime, that's justice, you know what I mean? And the
hmm
left is like, we need social justice, we need,
yeah.
we need to balance things out to make it, more fair.
And sometimes that crime punishment is the injustice and type
Eh,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. So a lot of these, like, it's a common value in name only, you know what I mean?
Yeah, every single one of them. But I don't know. Maybe calling that out is part of what the internet's here for. Maybe saying, "Hey guys," because that's been one of the eye-opening things I think to everybody in the last 5 years is that maybe we do have linguistic differences here. We're using the same word, but we have different dictionaries. And maybe if we can like just start saying, "All right, let's stop playing with that," and kind of like start parsing out what we're all really talking about here, and see where we really can get to some agreement here, because it's still there. Like even in the criminal one, like I don't think anybody anywhere wants Well, I know I've already thought of exceptions. I won't say, yeah, you can't say universal, but most people don't want innocent people punished.
Yeah, yeah,
Most people we have certain levels of crimes that we all would agree is like, okay, you gotta be detained, and so there's levels of agreement inside of the thing for sure. There has to be, you know.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, like, do you think just, I guess, these two examples? I think a lot of it. I think a lot of it boils down to this internal locus of control issue, where it's like, well, it's like the individual versus the collective, the individual versus the external. And so I guess the question is,
Well, there's some free will in that too, and the of the individual inside the criminal stuff. Like one side thinks that the person's completely responsible for their crime, the other side doesn't. And well, maybe it's external, but like looking at the individual, like can we blame that individual or not?
right, are they a victim of their environment, which is why they did crime?
Yeah, it's some more
Or
external.
are they completely responsible because they're they're an evil sinner, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how do you have any ideas for like how those two perspectives can like come together?
No. I was just thinking about because one of the things that Daniel Dennett was just talking today on Michael Shermer. I just listened to it, so it's coming up a lot. But you should go check it out. But he was talking about somebody who might like have like some brain tumor, and
Yeah.
that brain tumor makes them act a certain way. And can you blame that person, or is it even the brain tumor? Is it the machinery all the way down, type stuff? And that even gets a little bit different than just external factors. It's just like maybe that person is born that way type stuff. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't see a way that.
Do you do you think like trying to like educate people on the reality of both? It's not just external, it's not just internal. Do you
Oh, I think
think
I was just going to say that it's like maybe the dialectic's the only answer there is that you guys have to fight this out, and the only way we can come to any sort of proper argument on this is the fight that you two have with each other on it. But then that seems like pushing the polarization is the answer again.
uh what I mean is transcending to a new perspective where the new
Mm.
perspective is a both situation. Do you
Yeah,
think
it's like
like
a dialectic.
do you think bringing together both perspectives and saying both at the same time is a way to unify?
Yeah, I mean, but I guess that's kind of what we sort of try to do in the criminal system, right? I mean, we leave it to the jury of peers. Our Supreme Court is placed based off of voting, and it's not supposed to be political and that sort of stuff. But I think it is all supposed to kind of have designed into it that there's the differing views and differentiating starting points at this stuff, and they all look at it together.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things that I go to is the concept of well-being. It's a Sam Harris concept. I often call it meta well-being because I feel like people get confused. I think Sam Harris is talking about like this more robust idea of well-being, where a lot of people they have the simplistic approach to well-being. It's like, oh, drugs give me well-being, therefore drugs are good. It's like, no, you have to factor in the long term, you got to factor in the collective, you got to factor in multiple levels of neurological analysis. You know what I mean? So my thought is that if we can recognize that this meta well-being is the goal, that's a place of unity. It's like there's the right wing approach, which is like, oh, society is getting destroyed by crime. We need to lock them up. And we're aiming for, this meta well being. And then the left wing is like, well, there's these environmental factors and it's not their fault. And you're harming their well being. But it's like, we want to do both. We're not punishing just for punishment's sake. You know what I mean? We're not trying to torture criminals, but we want to make sure society is safe and healthy. And so it's like we're both aiming at this meta well-being, and we got to kind of bring both strategies into alignment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I think maybe both sides would kind of, well, except for the extremists, but they would kind of like agree to the idea that that's the goal or that's the aim.
Yeah. Yeah. My hope is that like getting that as the goal can help you just, there's like different levels of complex nuance. Like it's divisive down here, and then you like work through the nuance, and then you can unify up at that level. That's kind of my hope.
Yeah, I would hope so too. One of the things about both is in the way humans are, because like we're talking about the physiology of all of them and that sort of stuff. But I mean, I was just seeing this morning that like Joe Biden announced he's building wall down on the southern border and type stuff like that. But the same thing would happen to the right wing. Like if they completely got their way on something, sooner or later they're going to run into reality and then have to backtrack on that a little bit. So like there's half a level of me of like, if either of you got your way all the way down, pretty soon you guys yourselves are going to be backtracking on it because you're going to run into the fallout of getting your way all the way down on that stuff. And
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
uh, so I don't know. It's just it's all about foresight. Like, can you get people to like agree upon and stop long enough to think of the future that hard enough in a way of saying like, yeah, we need to come to union on this, because if it's just all one way or all the other way, that we're going to go off the track. So the baseball bat's going to fall or someone's going to grab it.
Yeah.
And
So you mentioned trade-offs in the past, and I feel like that's really relevant to this question of like unity. And I feel like a lot of the times the political dynamic, it's kind of like good versus evil, right? Both sides have a bias to looking at it through this like this polarizing lens. And I feel like there's the trade-off perspective is like a lens where it's like when you're doing trade-offs, you recognize that there's two good things. And so it's not good versus evil. It's like good versus good. And like, how do we balance these into a solution?
yeah, the thing is, like, I know I view it that way when I come across like the average Joe on stuff, whereas maybe there's some in the managerial class using, that they're using people's good intentions to enact certain things that they want, and I don't view them as good. But I view the average person leaning the other direction, and even when it goes too far, I just generally, I mean, some of the times, one of the reasons I said I've leaned conservative in recent years is because I've felt that left side's almost like an autoimmune disorder, which is like it's white blood cells, but it's just too many of them like at once. You know what I mean? Like it's good. It's trying to do good and it's trying to do good things. It's just it's going off the rails. And
That's a
when
very fascinating analogy.
it's in good faith and that sort of stuff, and that's generally how I view the average person. And but I know from, well, now it's on both sides that there's a good evil dichotomy going on there, and I do think it would be best to push that message of like, hey guys, it's good. Let's not overlook that there's some usurpers using your good or your good against you. But
Mhm.
most of the people are, it's good versus good, trying to figure out the best good. And
Yeah. And when it comes to like the philosophy of trade-offs, I feel like there are three concepts that really help for me. They really help, like conceptualize, concretize, reify this whole trade-off framework, right? And so my guess is that like more education about like the following three concepts will help. Like if everyone can build a framework, a lens for viewing the world through this trade-off lens, I think that would help the Unity project. And so I want to get your opinion on these three aspects. The first is Aristotelian ethics. The second is the trolley problem. And the second is like type 1 versus type 2 errors.
mhm.
Do you want me to go into introduce those first?
I know what each of them are. Do you want? Did you want me to?
You can introduce them so everyone's on the same page.
So Aristotelian ethics, Nicomachean, I can never say that word, but you're talking about the concept of vice and virtue can each go off the rails. Um, so you can have too much of a good thing or too much of a bad thing in any one of the vices or virtues. There's a different end to each one of those.
Yeah.
And what was the second one? You said the
Trolley problems.
oh, well, the trolley problems are always like your moralistic choices on when it comes down to two very different difficult choices, and it's a pretty good way to kind of demonstrate the differences in axioms when it comes to different philosophical takes, such as um, utilitarianism versus deontology. Utilitarianism is if there's is save the most people no matter what. The ontology is no kill no matter what.
Right.
So no action to make a kill. So like the deontology is like I would pull the lever to kill. I would not pull the lever because that would be me making the choice to kill. Whereas the utilitarianism would be like I would definitely pull the lever to kill one person over two people. And
Exactly.
then there's millions of those. And then the final one you said was type one errors. Type one errors. I usually it's easiest to go with maybe pregnant people or something like that. Type
Mhm.
one error is saying, "Hey, you're pregnant and you're not pregnant," and type two is, "Hey, you're not pregnant and you are pregnant." It's one is seeing something that's not there. The other one is not seeing something that is there.
Exactly. So for me, this is like really helpful because it like each of these different little examples is kind of a paradigm for seeing the trade-off landscape, and where it's neutralizing the bipolar landscape and showing a good versus good landscape or an evil versus evil landscape, where it's like it's showing you how tough these decisions are. And so basically, for example, for in the trolley problem, because it's a tough decision, like you're saying, yeah, it's like I my bias leans this way, but if you think the opposite, like I see why it's a tough decision. I don't think you're evil. You're just slightly you're biased in a slightly different way. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Uh-huh.
And so like instead of the social good versus evil, if we think of it in terms of these, trolley, the right wing trolley problem, the left wing trolley problem, maybe we can see each other as, oh, you're just slightly biased, you're not evil.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And let me think, the Aristotelian ethics, I'm trying to remember an example that really kind of helped me, and no examples are popping to my mind immediately. But
Of a virtue going too far.
yeah.
I mean, I think both sides. I mean, you could probably like point at kids or something with both of them. Like both sides really, really care about kids,
Oh, okay.
and both sides really, really go kind of too far, uh, getting exuberant about showing that they care for kids and that sort of deal. And
Yeah.
um, so, I mean, that's as far as like the. I mean, I think everybody can kind of know like vices going off the rail are bad deals, but virtues going off the rails are kind of where people seem to have a blind spot in maybe in all time, but in recent years especially. Um,
Um, can you just for playing building an example? Can you think of like a right wing virtue that we can play with?
a right wing virtue that we can play with is you go sex purity.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, an Aristotelian perspective on sexual purity, something like if it goes too far, you're just the whole the tyrannical sexual purity. I heard in the news I think someone at Daily Wire was like they want to get rid of no fault divorce, stuff
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. Or Jordan
Mhm.
Peterson probably got unfairly maligned as supporting forced monogamy, something like that. That would
But
be
but there are incels who who would go so far as to, like, the way he was misframed. There are people in the world who do think that that should be.
Right,
Um,
right. That would be an
yeah.
example of the sexual purity going too far, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And so you can take your virtue and you can make it extreme, and that's when it goes off the rails. Whereas maybe the opposite. So in Aristotelian ethics, he divides it between excesses of a virtue and deficiencies of the virtue. And so if you're lacking the sexual purity, you get into this deficiency zone where the right wing has a heyday with all the examples of weird.
Body count's the big one lately, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Just
Yeah. Um, if you look at the left wing, I would say one of the things that's happened a lot in recent years is race, caring for race issues, and the virtuous side of it has gone off the rails, like a little bit, in the sense of, like, we got to correct for this so hard that we will overlook criminal situations, or situations that do need
for
some
the equity principle.
equity principle, or we should discriminate against other races to balance things out here, type deal.
Right.
Whereas the vice, or the lack of virtue on the end of that sort of thing, breaks into, well, maybe what we had historically with that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I feel like having an Aristotelian lens for the political landscape, it helps you see things it helps you see that there are extremes on both sides. So it's not like good versus evil. It's like evil versus evil and good versus good, somewhere
Yeah.
that's somewhere in the middle,
Yep. Yep.
right? And that paradigm seems like a way to achieve unity, where people are retreating from the extremes and coming towards the Aristotelian good.
I really like it too, and that's one of the areas where I like to look at immune disorders or autoimmune disorders. like you want to be in balance with your immunity, or what do you call it? Your system of I forget the word for it, but anyway, autoimmune disorders can kill you as much as
The
just
disease.
the disease. Yeah.
Yeah, that is an absolutely fascinating analogy. From an Aristotelian perspective, that's
Yeah.
that's the immune system is the virtue. Too much immune system is the autoimmune disease, right?
Yep, and lack of
And a
immune
lot
system
is just
is,
disease.
yep, just
Yeah,
fall apart.
that's a great little like visceral example.
Mm.
So yeah, the trolley problem. Oh, now the type 1, type 2 error thing. So for me, this is really helpful in thinking about risk aversion. This goes back to the cockroach thing. Like, is the adventurous cockroach right, and is the anxious cockroach evil? Is it a good cockroach versus evil cockroach, or are they both good? They have different risk aversions, and like they like the ideologically diversity is good in the long run. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so the type 1, type 2 error, a lot of it is like, well, the right wing is really afraid of. Okay, I'm gonna get a little specific on the trans issue here. The right wing is really afraid of the error where kids who are not trans are being like brainwashed into being trans, and they have a bad experience, and then they detransition. And it's like, oh, the horror. We're really worried about that error. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So the right wing is obsessed with that error, and then the left wing is obsessed with the opposite error, which is we're worried about the kids who are trans and they're being brainwashed to not be trans, and that's harming their well-being, and they're suicidal, and they have all these miserable outcomes, and that's the opposite error.
Yeah.
And like to me, a common sense approach is the middle, where it's like we don't want either of these errors, and it's like, how do we minimize both error types,
Yeah. Hmm.
right?
Yeah, it's I mean, that's a tough one, but yeah, that describes it well. It's like you guys are afraid of the misattribution. You guys are afraid of attributing it, not attributing it when it is there. Yeah.
Right. But I guess with this type 1, type 2 error lens, like my hope is that by using this lens, you can learn to respect the other side's argument. You'll be like, okay, I agree. We do want to reduce those things. As like, well, and then like if both sides can agree to respect both errors, then that brings us to that good versus good zone, right?
Yeah, it can get, yeah. And part of the deal, I mean, that one's a bit of a difficult thing because there's just still so much unknown, about it. And part of the problem with it is there's not longitudinal studies over time, and we haven't been able to do. And who knows if we can still do longitudinal studies, because the way that we're not really allowed to do studies on humans the same way anymore.
Oh,
But
that perfectly feeds into the next topic.
mm,
The next topic is the epistemological crisis.
oh yeah,
It's
mm,
that's it's like, can we even trust the science of can we trust with all the biases in society? How do we know what's even true about these divisive issues?
yeah, it's getting really hard. I mean, I've just in the past few weeks, I've watched a bunch of stuff about papers that were p-hacked and had problems with them, and you know some of that p-hacking had an ideological idea purpose behind it, but most times it's actually just an incentive thing that get my paper published. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
they don't want inconclusive results.
yeah, got to get a paper. Don't want to do all this stuff. I got to, and something interesting has to come out of this, or I nobody cares.
Just so the audience is clear, can you describe p hacking?
Yeah, p-hacking is just altering your data or removing outliers in your data, which to some sort of level, that sometimes can happen with like that. There's one crazy outlier in like a whole group or something, but it really is um, purposefully choosing or disregarding data that doesn't align with your hypothesis to alter the outcomes or something. And so it's makes your hypothesis lean the direction that you wanted it to lean by altering the data.
Right. Yeah. So the the epistemological crisis, I often think of it like, okay, just subtracting the scientific domain, the social domain. We've got a ton of lay people, right? No,
Uh-huh.
and nobody is an expert in every field. It's like impossible to be an expert in every field. So we've got this complicated situation where all of these lay people, it's like, well, I need to trust some experts on this topic, and I need to trust different experts on that topic. And it creates this like interconnected web of who do we trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the elephant analogy where it's like there's a bunch of blind people that are feeling the elephant. And
Yeah.
if you're feeling the data from different angles, you're going to receive different conclusions. It's like if you test the data from this side, you feel the trunk of the elephant and you're blind, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a snake over here. This is a really evil conclusion, right? And then you go feel it from a different side. They're like, this isn't an evil thing. This is just, it feels like a hippopotamus's rear end. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
we're getting completely different conclusions based on which way the blind people are approaching the data.
Yeah.
And because the data is so vast and so complex, it's way worse. It's probably way worse than blind people feeling an elephant. And you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's what it, for certain issues, that's what it feels like to me. And I know some people are optimistic. I don't think there's reason not to be, but like the way the way our computing powers and our tracking powers in certain areas are getting so much stronger. I mean, even just some of the stuff that we're talking about, like all the constant people in the world walking around with heart rate monitors on their arms nonstop, and some of the data that we might accidentally get out of that, in the sense of like, oh, some sort of a national crisis happened or something, and now somebody has data that they saw all these heart rates like shoot up at like the exact moment or something like that, and then they can start even grouping that stuff together even more. That some of our technological powers have reason for us to get optimistic about how much more of the elephant we can grab at once. But at the same time, too, is like, if I really start thinking about it, I start thinking of how big that elephant is, and it seems just impossible to me.
So we just finished discussing the elephant, and the next thing is I don't know what the source of this information is, but I just learned this very recently. There's something there. I don't even know the name of the phenomenon, but the phenomenon is something like this: your biases make you more accurate in discovering certain truths. And the way to think of it is like, think of it in the enemy dichotomy, right? The right winger whose enemy is the left winger. The right winger, because of his bias, he is much more accurate at finding the problems within leftism. And so
I mean, I believe that'd be 100% true, because you're both kind of like taking the critical eye to the other side and not to yourself, and that maybe that's
exactly.
just kind of natural in humans. But
Yeah, and it probably happens at many levels of analysis. If there's a conflict between a brother and a sister, the brother is going to remember all the things that the sister did wrong. The sister is going to remember all the things the brother did wrong, and both are like forgetful about their own problems. You know what I mean?
yeah, tell me if you think this sounds accurate. I think it is. I think I could pull up some stuff to back it up, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But even the next thing you have on the list is the type 1 versus the type 2, which you've already talked a little bit about. But some people kind of jokingly, if we're going to put it back in a medical realm, or maybe like a diagnostic realm, but they'll say that conservatives, when it goes extreme, they're kind of schizophrenic types, whereas leftists, where they kind of, if they go extreme, it kind of becomes more like a borderline types. But that plays into type 1 error versus type 2 errors, because schizophrenia and conspiracy type theory thinking is very, very heavy type 1 error type stuff. So it's kind of like you think you see the thing, and all the, you've got the hard pareidolia, you got the hard hearing, reading, seeing all the words in the newspaper, and it makes another sentence, or reading the patterns, and so
Yeah.
it's almost kind of like schizophrenic type stuff. So it's like hard type 1 errors, and the left side is better at kind of saying, oh, you schizos, like, spaz down, that's not there, you're overreacting, that's it's not there. But then the other side is like, the left might lean more to the type 2 errors, where it's like more like, no, it's nothing, nothing's going on, nobody's doing anything, what are you talking about? And calm down, everything's going to be fine if you just leave it alone, let them be, type stuff. And the other side saying, no, there really is a tiger there. There really is a tiger in that, there's a tiger there. And like, no, tiger, shut up, everything's fine, dance, party, eat, play, dance, whatever. And so it's like, even type 1 and type 2 kind of lean one direction versus the other.
Absolutely. So like that little finding about the accuracy, like the accuracy built into the biases, that kind of was a little bit hopeful for me. It's like, if we work together, we can use our biases uh, constructively. Yeah, you could weaponize your bias and just like demonize the other side. It's like, I'm really
Yeah,
good at finding all your problems. But if you like work it together, it'd be like, oh, you're right. I do need to fix that. Thank you for exposing that. I'm too biased to see that myself. And then like you
100.
you work together, and that is actually a net positive sum situation.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. The next thing is the is problem of morality. So this is, I guess I coined this in my blog. Maybe someone else has coined it differently. Basically, when you're doing like a moral conclusion, you have to like apply your values to reality, right? And just a stupid example: there is a dead body, and there's a guy standing over the dead body with a gun, right? So you see the reality, and then you have a moral judgment. You're like, oh, there's a murderer. He needs to go to jail or be sentenced to death or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, if you get your epistemology wrong, then you get your morality wrong. So you concluded that this was a murderer because he's standing over a dead body with a gun. Well, if your facts are wrong, like, oh, the dead body has a gun and it discharged and this was actually a self-defense situation, right? Because you didn't figure out reality properly, then that caused you to come to an incorrect moral conclusion. Or actually self-defense is justified, he doesn't need to be sentenced to death, he's not a murderer. You know, all of these downstream conclusions were because you messed up your understanding of reality.
That's interesting. So you think that maybe the reverse could be true, that like maybe if you got your is right, but your ought wrong, some good conclusion could come out of it. I'm trying to think of an example. Just I'm thinking like you could accidentally get something right because you had your is wrong.
No, nobody should be punished for murder.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, or something. I don't know. But
But
yeah, yeah. That example is just to highlight how important the epistemological crisis is, right? It's like it more and more. It feels like we're dealing with two different sets of facts. People are living in different realities. It's like
yeah.
no wonder we can't come to the same conclusions because we're not dealing with the same is clauses.
Things would be way easier if we had all the ises. I'm sure, like if we really did have them, but I know in a sense that everybody could agree on them, you know. But
Yeah.
there'd still be problems, but it'd just be nicer if we didn't have that one, and that might be the bigger one.
Yeah. So for me, like the two things that stand out as just like most contributing to this epistemological crisis, I think I would put these two, like selection bias, cherry picking, and confirmation bias, just like following the data you like rather than seeing both sides, you know, like the echo chamber thing. Cherry picking and echo chamber thing, those two things seem like pretty big contributors to this problem. Do you see it that way?
Yeah. Just as like the biggest problems for figuring out what is.
Yeah. Do you see any like patterns of behavior that are contributing to this divide in like reality, in understanding?
Echo chambers, cherry picking. I don't know. Sometimes it's just a lack of information. You know, I don't know how to. I mean, maybe that's part of echo chamber, because your echo chamber's filtering out stuff as much as it's filtering in stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It probably goes back to just fundamental there's probably an optimistic versus pessimistic bias that creates two different, like, it probably feeds into two different realities. If you have a really pessimistic view, maybe you'll think that there's lots of villains in high places doing evil, and then if you're optimistic, you're like, oh, most people are good. It's the conspiracies, not that many of them. Is, you know what I mean? Two different
Yeah.
realities.
Yeah. 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 It's tough.
So
What if only one party has all the facts wrong?
yeah, if you knew that one side was completely wrong, what do you do if there's a complete? It's not like both people are kind of correct. It's like, what if the fact gap is huge?
Well, I mean that's part of the problem. Is like, I mean, I think there's on any given issue, the fact gap could be huge one way or the other. But I think it kind of comes a wash when you look at all of them pulled together. But
Yeah, I think that's true.
I don't think there's any sort of issue that actual facts, can't can't help. There's always the concept of pragmatics and stuff like that, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm 100% a believer that accurate facts are more important than
Yeah.
the first thing that's important.
Yeah, I've hypothesized if we need like some sort of like a court of epistemology where we need like dedicated government people, or I don't know, like we need dedicated people to like dig into things, get get to the rock bottom and figure out what truth is. But then that becomes, it looks kind of like an Orwellian thing, like we've got this ministry of truth. Like,
Well, it's so gameable by corruption. Before long, it would be the opposite of what it says it is. So, like, it so frequently happens. But
right, you have to
um,
figure out how to like you have to figure out how to design it with checks and balances to keep out the corruption somehow.
yeah, which strangely enough, that sort of thing. I mean, it does sort of seem like the concept on Twitter of like community nodes.
Mm.
Strangely enough, is like a like you said, an emergent like group
Yeah,
fact
yeah,
checking
yeah.
does seem to help sometimes, but then that also gets weird when not the people of the large group don't have the expertise to make judgments.
Mm.
It's hard.
Yeah. So like epistemology is only half the problem. Axiology, like what are we supposed to like even value in the first place, right? You've got the is
Hmm.
problem, you got the ought problem. If we disagree on the oughts, then no wonder we're going to have different conclusions, right?
Yeah. Um, yeah, the axiom stuff is it gets difficult. I mean,
So there's one dichotomy. So perennialism is like trusting the values of the past, right? You've got a
mm,
history, you've got ancient religions, something that they were doing was working, and so perennialism, let's trust the past, they had the right values. And like the opposite of that is like don't trust the past. We're in a new environment, we're in a novel situation, we need new values. We should have a bias towards progress, not a bias towards the past.
mhm.
How do you feel about that?
Like most of the things, right square in the middle of it. That you gotta pull from both. You can't discount what got you here, and you can't stay stuck where you're at. And
Mm,
you probably need both sides of those people pushing and pulling you to really make anything actually work.
yeah.
Um, um,
Yeah, I feel like having those two things, that's like recognizing the validity of both of those is another way to turn it into a good versus good paradigm. It's like, yeah,
mhm,
it's like evolutionarily the past is important. So it's like, okay, that's a good thing to take into account. Like, what's the tradition? And then like mutation is the other half of evolution. It's like, oh, we got a new environment, we need to mutate. We need to recognize the importance of that as well, right?
mhm.
Um now, oh, did you have something to say?
Yeah, everything ultimately becomes kind of like an internal struggle between the yin and yang, doesn't it? I mean, it all just does
Mm,
kind of come out as a dialectic happens. Whether I saw this picture one time, I
mm,
think it was like Foucault who made a joke of like the Hegelian dialectic,
yeah.
and he too was like saying, "I hate the Hegelian dialectic," but it's like you come to this monster on the road and you go, "I'm not going to fight this dumb monster," and you turn around, you face the other direction, and there's the same monster. Like there's no way to escape it. Like you got to struggle with like the opposing sides of stuff, and they need each other, and
Right.
need to reflect each other, and the friction and the conflict's going to happen. And sometimes you got to accelerate it to get to something better. Sometimes you got to avoid that conflict to avoid something bad really happening. And it just seems like at some point or another, you're talking about just the cosmic moment, if that makes any sort of sense. Like we're just forever stuck in this push pull, push pull, push pull, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's pretty wild.
But I feel like a lot of people don't see it through that dialectical lens. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's the problem, right? This good versus evil lens doesn't understand the dialectic as much.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Um, you're talking about the cosmic, the unavoidable dialectic. I recently did an exercise in uh, trying to map out as many types of dialectics as I could, and I was being very like symbolic. I was creating like, cosmic dialectics, biological dialectics, neurological, like patterns in nature that look dialectical. I was just trying to map everything out.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to, this exercise helped me see kind of this interesting pattern, which is like the dialectic. There's almost like two pathways to the dialectic. There's the violent dialectic, and there's the cooperative dialectic. Yeah, the
Yeah.
competition versus cooperation. You can,
Civil war versus national divorce, or unify together. That, I mean, you kind of
yeah,
put it out right there.
yeah. There's like different mutations of. It's not necessarily one dialectical flow. There could be a unique outcome of a dialectical process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just a silly example to help make this more visual. I created like a planetary dialectic, which is like you've got the thesis, which is like a gravitoid, right? You've got planet A, which is the thesis, and then like planet B comes into the space, right? So there, these two planets are coming together. So it's the conflict, right? You've got two things that are conflicting. What happens? Well, maybe the one just absorbs the other. Like the bigger one just sucks them up and takes over. That's like the violent approach. It's like, I'm bigger than you, bam, you're mine. And then like the kind of cooperative approach is the creation of a solar system where it's like, okay, the moon is now rotating around the earth. We're not destroying each other. We're coming into harmony. We're coming into balance. It's kind of we're both coexisting in this relationship. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that analogy is to hopefully provide hope that a inevitable dialectic does not necessarily have to be violent.
For sure, and I absolutely hope for it too. And strangely enough, as many times in history as you could point to, oh gosh, it all fell apart and blew into conflict in theory. It's a little bit of like a type one type, more kind of like a cognitive bias that you count the bad things and you don't count the good things. But there's been plenty of times in history where things diffused and came together well, and you don't really like have it because you don't have like some war historian like
Mm.
what's it called, Dan Carlin, talking about the awesome, great, big, huge, beautiful battles that came out of the thing. It actually just kind of
It was
figured
too,
itself out.
yeah, it was too benign, too boring for anyone to
Too
notice.
boring. Yeah.
Yep.
But it happens. It happened. Maybe it happened more in history than the conflict part happened.
Yeah, I don't know enough history to be able to measure that. But that's a good point. So I guess the next thing is the whole within axiology, there's the whole postmodern issue and the
Hmm.
idea of transcending postmodernism. And I'm willing to bet you have lots of thoughts on this.
Well, strangely enough, I mean, like happens with the dialectic, you turn around the things there. Like I've seen postmodernists. Nowadays it sounds like a buzzword for leftism, but I know plenty of rightist postmodernists,
Okay.
and but the issue with postmodernism is that they're not wrong. It's just I don't think. it has to go as far as they go with it, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Like I think there's ground floor. I think there is axioms. I think there is facts and that sort of stuff. But they're not wrong in their critiques when all of those things are slippery and difficult and have bias and perception scrambled up into them. And so the only dangers I really think, because I think it's good, I think it's worth knowing about. I think the only dangers is the same thing that I was saying about the Socratic method. Is the only danger is going all the way with it, deconstructing entirely down to the point of pure chaos, or claiming that science is so hopelessly biased that there can never be anything true found at all inside of it. Um, but yes, incentives change science. Yes, a bias alters science. It gets in the way. There's communal groups who form epistemes, as Foucault would put it, of thought, of knowledge creation that's not necessarily just following the data. That all happens. It's all real, but that doesn't mean that real science and real disinterested facts and truth and basis axioms in the world, or base truths in mathematics aren't real. And But I think it's all. I saw somebody recently like talking about the Matrix. The Matrix is Baudrillard. As people kind of point into that as like postmodernism, that you're inside of this world that's kind of constructed. But if other people pull it out even farther and say that's just Plato's cave again. But what real postmodernists say, and a lot of people don't realize this, is that bad, crude world. You've seen the Matrix, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love
Yeah.
favorite movie.
The real postmodernists say that crappy world outside of the Matrix is also in the Matrix. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's the problem with real postmodernism.
Mm,
And me, I believe that, like, yes, there's postmodernism in the Matrix, but there's a real world outside the Matrix.
mm,
You know, and a real postmodernist would, as Baudrillard did, because Baudrillard was critical of the movie. He said, "This is the movie opposed. This is the exact movie the Matrix would make about the Matrix," which is that this is it. Always just goes back to eternity of nothing is nothing,
mm,
and but I think it's like a great concept. Like if it's used as the movie makers of the Matrix use it, of like, look, some of this is slippery and it's a lie, but there's real out there.
mm,
And whereas the postmodernist says, no, even that real world is a Matrix world.
mm,
And that's where I say, reel off that a little bit, guys, and they couldn't. It was just all the way down, turtles all the way down.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so my take on the whole thing, I largely agree with you. That like the postmodern skepticism can go too far. I don't know how far I want to go down this pathway. I've been kind of like building an epistemological perspective that kind of I think would help solve some of those skeptical problems. But I think that largely an evolutionary perspective resolves a lot of these issues. So
100% agree. Yeah.
yeah, whenever I see philosophic issues, my instinct is, okay, let's follow the path of evolution. How did this problem arise? And most of the times that resolves a lot of the conundrums. Um, so like I guess an evolutionary perspective, and also like an emphasis on measurement, right? So I think part of the postmodern zeitgeist is this relativism. If skepticism can break down all truth paradigms, then everything is relative. But it's like if we can figure out how to find some reliable measurements within the chaos, we can cling to those measurements, and that's a way to define objective reality. That which can be measured is objective. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100% true. And evolution is one of the base axioms, or scientific axioms, that I fall back onto as the ultimate descriptor. And one of the points of that that points to, and they could call it the naturalistic fallacy or something like that, of saying that which is natural is assuming that that's good is a fallacy or something like that. But
Yeah,
I think it's pretty easy to pull on that and say, um, what is our axiom of a direction we want to go? And I think evolution kind of points out pretty clearly that you the living beings want to continue living and thriving if possible, and that's a pretty good starting point. And there's definitely easily things to look at. You could say, like, this is one of the points Jordan Peterson pointed out about him years ago, and the new pragmatists, like people like C.S. Pierce and James Dewey and those guys. Not James Dewey, Dewey as well, but um, William James and those guys pointed out the problem of there's infinity pathways. There's infinity pathways, but they pointed that way out before the postmodernists did. But they pointed to evolution as the thing is saying, yeah, but there's only so many viable pathways. And there's some pathways that are better than other pathways for the survival and thriving of
exactly.
beings. And I think it's a pretty easy answer to this stuff.
Right. That goes back to your pragmatist philosophy your favoring of the pragmatism paradigm, right?
In general, I mean, I can see the problems with that too. The problem is, like any good armchair crap philosopher, I spend a lot of time dissecting the stuff I like too. So I can point to problems with pragmatism as well. Like pragmatism is one of the answers. We were joking and saying, what if sometimes the is wrong but the ought is right? Well, that's actually one of the jokes of pragmatism, like when it's talking about like religion and that sort of stuff. That those sorts of things help bind communities together and create strong bonds and create units, but their is off, you know. And but do I think that's always 100%? Well, we better just go with those placebos or something like that. I don't think I don't sign off 100% on pragmatism, and it can even see places where that could cause problems. But the same goes with liberalism. Like, I won't even touch yet on like the right wing postmodernists or something like that. But a lot of those guys are heavily critical, even more so than the lefties, of liberalism. Almost even worse, like it's cutting their criticisms of my liberalism, libertarianism, and one of the things that they kind of point to is like this postmodern thing. Like I was talking to Alexander Dugin, and he wanted all those different regional balkanized areas. And one of his ideas with that is like each one of those balkanized areas don't need to even just have their own rules. They can have their own perceptions of what reality is. You know, like he's a postmodernist in that sort of like relativism. Their axioms and epistemologies are allowed to be 100% different in each one of those balkanized regions, and they really believe in that 100%.
And that's not a recipe for minimizing friction between states.
Yeah, but they believe it will lead to that.
Yeah. You mentioned the naturalistic fallacy, and you probably know a lot of my moral perspective, the game theoretic perspective on morality.
Yeah, I'm with game theory too. I really like game theory to help with that as well.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about the naturalistic fallacy, I feel like it's coming at the problem backwards. Like it's not you're not supposed to be asking is it good because it's natural. You're supposed to be saying what is good to begin with. Well, goodness comes from our evolutionary sentiments, and evolution comes from nature. So goodness comes from nature. So it's kind of like they're getting confused by looking at it from the opposite angle.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
But I mean, you can also just grant the very simple thing too, that there's all sorts of things in nature that are bad, that are natural. You know what I mean? Like, sure.
Yeah, it's not as simple as everything natural equals good, but it's not to say that goodness transcends that which is natural somehow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right. So I guess this last question I wanted to get into with you is inspired by Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
It is when, well, Jordan Peterson has the bias. He only asks when the left goes too far. I want to ask when both of them go too far.
Well, he usually answers that in the question, though, right? Like he says,
He
"We know that we know the right goes too far with their ethnic division." Isn't that how he frames it normally? Like,
yeah, you're 100% correct. But I feel like we can explore where the right goes too far more than what Jordan Peterson does.
yeah, he drops that one, which is like the easy one, but they go too far in a lot of areas for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that your follow up bullet points or something to look at with that same question, or just go off the question first?
Yeah. When does the right and left go too far? I have a couple ideas. If you want me to go
Oh, those are your
first, or
answers. Sure, you go ahead and go first.
okay, yeah, I put together a little list, and this is probably not comprehensive, but it's my best attempt. So I organized these in a hierarchy of severity of, the number one thing is it's too far in the most extreme degree, et cetera, et cetera. So the number one thing that I've come to see is that jumping to violence as a solution, right? Being quick to assume violence is the answer. Like that's one metric for knowing you've gone too far. You know what I mean?
100%. That falls right in line with my general politics, which I don't call myself like a libertarian. I'm somewhere between liberal and libertarian. I'm not a full libertarian.
Mhm.
I'm not. I'm mostly liberal. But one of the things I like from libertarianism is the non-aggression principle.
Mm.
Like no, you've got basically no reason to initiate aggression.
Yeah, yeah, and it seems like on the left there's with the whole BLM thing, it seemed like they weren't like they didn't push back on the problem within their own group enough. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And but I guess it seems like the right is kind of straying off in a similar direction. The January 6th
Well,
is, it's debatable how it compares, but it's kind of like the polarization is making both sides a little bit inching in the violent direction, right?
there's something about this that I think even right wing philosophers, even thinkers, will grant to this is that in general, when it turns to this sort of group violence, carving out a space for stuff that turned into actual wars, left wing violence is generally more mid tier. It's like it's not as lethal. The right wing violence, when it goes hard. It's a little bit like if you've ever noticed or heard about the difference between suicide rates between men and women. Well, men are way higher because they succeed at it more often. It's a little bit the same thing with the violence thing here. Is like when the right wing does the violence, they succeed at it, whereas the left wing, even some of their intentions are to do this sort of a I forget what the exact term the right will use for it, but it's intentionally kind of like a mid-tier violence. It's
Yeah.
almost kind of like more like poking the bear than it is to actually kill on purpose.
But I guess Jordan Peterson loves to talk about the Soviet Union. I guess it seems like there might be a counter argument that the left can be pretty destructive too. Right?
Yeah, I was gonna call, like I said, carving out like the war space. I was just kind of talking about your average right winger versus your average. Like you are likely to maybe get probably hit just as quick, like hit from a left winger or right winger, but you're more likely to get seriously hurt from your average right winger, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, when stuff gets to the great big major calamities, yeah, they equal out pretty well.
Yeah. So yeah, so that was the first one. The second one is when they use dehumanizing speech.
Um, for sure. Mm. I mean that usually leads to stuff. I mean, I know it's like one of like the steps of leading towards like
Yeah.
anytime you get to it, oh, I hate it when I forget very basic words, but it happens when you're on podcasts. A genocide. One of the steps towards genocide is dehumanizing speech.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's I think that brains are very symbolic. And so like when you start to associate things with, the concept is like a pest, right? A rodent, we exterminate rodents. Cockroaches, we exterminate those things. Viruses, we exterminate them. So whenever you are verbally using an extermination analogy, you're like connecting dots in people's brains to like prepare for genocide. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so that seems like going way too far. Like, do not do those connections. Like, I love free speech. That's too far. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and like I think the left can do this too. The left has the bias to dehumanize the rich. It seems the further you
Oh
go,
yeah, yeah, that's true.
right?
Yeah,
Like the whole eat the rich, like that's a
but
dehumanization of people. You
but
don't eat people. That's
that exists in calling like elites lizard people too and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah,
That which comes from the right wing.
yeah. So my third one is jumping to the conclusion of malice, jumping to the conclusion of villains. That's the Hanlon razor.
Yeah.
That's slightly more mild. It's getting like a little bit more mild. Like it's these, you should try to avoid this. And like I use the term jumping. It's like you should be a little bit rigorous before you conclude malice. And
Yeah, the jump to conclusion was the highlight when I saw that, because I mean you can definitely conclude that there has been malice, or because could you even call sometimes malice extreme greed? Because sometimes some of that extreme greed maybe didn't, it just had an oversight of the villainy that it caused, but it's really just thinking of the self too much, and that's what it is sometimes. But that's still a malicious thing, but who it harms wasn't the thought. But then there's sometimes really that I really think that there's actually some decisions to intentionally harm, and which is it's one of the options on the board in the world that a lot of people just don't even like to come to terms with. But the real truth of it is like, yeah, sometimes the decision was to cause harm.
yeah, and humans are very good at rationalizing bad things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's
Hmm.
the scary thing. You like I have a bias to want to believe that most people are good, but it's like people can warp their psychology very easily.
Oh yeah.
The next one is when they engage in collective guilt, basically tribalism, right?
Hmm.
That seems to be a dangerous step too far. It's better to judge people by their own sins, not by sins of their ancestors, not by sins of their color. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
This seems,
That doesn't just have to be guilt. I mean, there's some assigning to the group things that make you overlook the individual, where either side can kind of go too far, and if it's even just
yeah. So yeah, and like there's like, how do I put this? So like there's the two perspectives. Like there is collectively there are systemic issues, and that is relevant. Individually, there are individual issues that is relevant, and so it's like there you have to. I guess the right approach seems to be finding a way to balance those. It's not just like jumping to the conclusion that this entire group is a problem. It's like, well, this entire group, there might be, environmental factors. It's much more nuanced, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. To
hmm.
avoid the lack of nuance on either end is is the idea. Um, Along the lines of this tribalism, I thought of another thing here, and I'm not exactly sure how to fit it in, but Robert Sapolsky talks about the neurotransmitter oxytocin.
Uh-huh.
It seems very relevant in that oxytocin is like your tribal chemical. It's your love chemical, it's your empathy chemical, and it's your tribal violence chemical. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so it's kind of this two-edged sword. It's like we want love, but like the more you love someone, the more you hate the person that is oppressing them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like the the mama bear concept, and care for the cub could turn into extreme um,
Yeah.
hate for the for the risk or for the threat of that, even if it isn't a threat. Yeah,
And that's why politically targeting kids is such a powerful strategy. They're coming for your kids. You're just
yeah,
activating all of their oxytocin. It's, those are the enemies. Like, this is my tribe. I love my tribe. You're coming after my tribe. Therefore, polarism. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, like going with regards to going too far on oxytocin, I get like it's so complicated because like half of me wants to say love is the solution to unity. And then I look at oxytocin, I'm like, minimizing love is the solution to unity. Like, turn
So
it all off. You know what I mean?
you're right back at the Aristotle, like the virtues, the
Uh,
virtue, the overkill of the virtues, the problem. Yeah.
there would be no tribalism if we had no love. Yeah. And I did a podcast with my brother on The Giver, and that was the whole debate. It's like, do we do we use chemicals to like neuter emotion in society?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a complicated dilemma. The next one is end justifies the means, the Machiavellian strategy. It seems like when you adopt the ends justifies the means strategy, that seems to be a metric for measuring when you've gone too far. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Well, no, not 100% of the time. Nothing's 100% of the time. And every once in a while, like some innocuous thing you can make a reason why
Yeah.
in this.
Yeah. I have a nuanced perspective towards that. When ends justifies the means is in the Machiavellian sense, not in the meta sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, the next one is when they deprive others of their rights. So that
That's
seems.
what I don't see that one on the list here,
Oh
but
yeah, I'm sorry. I altered the list since I gave it to you.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
The That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to add to it is like when you make policy and your policy, only serves your own interest, and there's other people with different interests around that. In a completely authoritarian world, that's obviously tyrannical. But there's also just a second problem with it in the United States where all these things are just going to be laws until the other guy gets in, and then it's going to get undone, and then it's going to get moved the other direction, and then it's going to get moved the other direction. There's there's a problem with that churning that's just as dumb as, I mean, I couldn't say just as dumb as just the tyrannical thing, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think policy making needs to be way more. The dialectic has to happen in anything that becomes policy all the way down, and uh, I don't any side that just kind of gets the power and says, "Oh, it's our way." I think you're just setting up to make stuff that can only ever be warred over. Turned into.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. And to me, it sounds. Tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you're alluding to the amorphous and the flexible nature of what is a right. Like we
Mhm,
argue back and forth. This is what our rights are, and then we keep changing the definition, right?
mhm.
Uh,
But I mean, that's why they're wedge issues. I mean, people also know that those are the areas where they can keep the divide going.
right. But I think that in order for a right to be officially a right, it needs to be instantiated via supermajority as a constitutional amendment. You know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
agree with that. Yeah,
And so
and
to the extent that we limit the definition of a right to supermajority stuff, then maybe that's a more clear line in the sand. It's not so wishy-washy. It's like we got a supermajority here, don't violate that. You know what I mean?
yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And the last one I also added was when they so a line in the sand when they've gone too far is when they harm. I I call it meta well-being, right? When there's when there's net harm, basically.
When they're aiming downwards. Yeah, that one gets a little bit harder to define, but
Yeah, that's
yeah, if it could get delineated out with, like, if we had God's Excel sheet or something like that, and you could prove that's happening, I 100% agree.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was my list of where we go too far, and so I think we had a pretty good discussion, pretty good,
Yeah, for sure.
pretty good dialectic on all the different sides of this.
Yeah, 100% agree.
So after this dialectic, are you more optimistic, less optimistic, or the same about?
Well, this is where we get into individual stuff. Is like I was never pessimistic about you, Seth.
I,
uh,
macro pessimism, macro optimism. Do you?
it all depends on, like, how much you start swaying people. Like, this is the method. You know what I mean? Because part of it is that thing that you pointed out, that on average, the average person is getting more and more separate and more cut off and more tribal, and but if all sides can start pushing people to, like, start thinking about coming back together and talking it out and thinking that we all really could come to an agreement or get closer to it or keep pushing towards it. I would be optimistic, and I do think the average person is. It's just that now they're so cut off from stopping and thinking about it. Like, hey, and that's an area where I agree with you, is that if everybody could get, because a lot of the stuff, your average, I have a bunch of friends who wouldn't know what the word axiological means and don't know what the word epistemic means and don't, dialectic what, and so they're just like at the beginning of it, and then sort of they're getting swayed. So yeah, the answer is education. The answer is catching people up on this stuff, but how to implement that or get it to where those institutions are on board with you aiming upward. Because sometimes I don't know if the institutions themselves are on board with that. But
Sure,
um,
sure. Well, I really,
but yeah, I think every average person that I know of could get through this, and they'd agree with you on it, and start thinking about and working on it. So it's like, just how do you get in front of the majority of the average person?
yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, Chris. I value your
No problem.
perspective. You're a
Thanks a
genius
lot.
guy, and you have expertise in areas where I probably have blind spots. So I value your perspective and critique. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate your stuff too. I appreciate how you lay it out, and you're doing, like, the actual philosophical work. I'm just a guy who reads it all and sneers at it. You know what I mean? But I like guys who actually get into the nitty gritty of labeling it out. That needs to be there in the stuff, and putting the ideas to paper, and making a strategy and all that sorts of stuff. Because really, in the end of all stuff, when I get around to doing that too, I'm the same type of thing that I criticize, which is just kind of like overly critical. Like, most of the philosophers I read through, I'm kind of just picking through to be like, what are you talking about, guy? And the real truth of it is that, as you've noticed here, as I'm talking about the postmodernism, which I know that I've railed on, the real truth of it is, like, every single one of them, after I go, what are you talking about, guy? At some point later, I'm saying, yeah, well, this guy says this, and he's got the point there, and you got to think about what this guy is saying here, and it's just kind of my path of going through, getting ideas in. But I like it when people take kind of what you do here, this kind of Straussian method of, like, let's take each one of them at what they're saying and see what they got to say, because if it gets to that level, it's worth putting it in and adding it to the big idea of how we get to that solution. That I root for the people with the optimism and the ideas to make it all better. I just can't help it. Maybe it's in my gut or physiology that I have a pessimistic side to me on stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully we can just hope for the best and keep trying, right?
For sure. But I'm glad there's guys like you and the Daniel guy out there trying to I don't doubt that if the people who had the stinky power gave you guys the chance to try to do it, that good things would happen. It's just getting the good faith upward aiming people in those spots is my worry,
For sure. Yeah.
So
All right.
sweet, it's good stuff.
Yep. Yep. Um,
Are you more optimistic after telling me all this, or?
um maybe. I feel like verbalizing like potential ways to like change people's paradigms helped like reify it as a possibility for me. Like I was able to imagine people seeing a new paradigm. And so if other people can do that, then that would be a step in the right direction.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, sweet.
All right, man. Take care.